The cold came fast that night. Lena Voss felt it the moment she stepped out of the back door of the Ashfield Pack Infirmary. The kind of cold that does not ease in. It arrives all at once, pressing against the skin like a hand being held flat against your chest. The thermometer above the rear entrance read -14. She did not look at it twice. She had grown up in this cold. She knew what it wanted. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking. The infirmary closed at 11 on weekdays. Lena's shift ended at past, which meant she was always the last one out. Always the one who turned off the lights and made sure the back door latched properly. Because if it did not latch, Dr. Marin would be irritated in the morning, and would not say so directly, but would find other ways to communicate her irritation for the rest of the day. Lena had learned, a long time ago, to prevent the things that could be prevented. She took the long path home. She always took the long path. The short route cut through the central square of Ashfield, past the Alphas building, past the row of houses where the senior pack members lived, past the places where people gathered even this late on a cold Tuesday and might look up and see her and feel the need to say something. Lena did not enjoy being said something to. The long path went east along the ridge, past the old storage buildings, past the tree line, over the wooden bridge that crossed the frozen stream, and then down through the lower residential streets where her apartment building stood between a laundromat and a very old hardware store that no one had owned in 3 years. 22 minutes longer than the short route. Lena did not mind. She had walked this path hundreds of times. She knew every place where the ground dipped, every patch where ice formed overnight and made you catch yourself mid-stride, every section of the old post and wire fence that the eastern wind had managed to push sideways over the years. She knew the sound of the pines in February, that sharp, rifle-shot crack when the cold split a branch, the way it carried in the dark like something urgent, like a signal, and then meant nothing at all. She was crossing the ridge, about 7 minutes past the storage buildings, when she heard something that was not a branch. She stopped. The wind had dropped for a moment, as it sometimes did on these cold nights, as though it needed to collect itself. In that gap of quiet, she heard it again. Not loud, not even particularly distinct. A sound somewhere between a breath and a whimper, the kind of sound that a person might almost convince themselves they had imagined, especially when it was -14 and the rational part of the brain was filing paperwork for going home and standing next to a heater. Lena did not try to convince herself. She turned toward the sound. It came from a split oak near the fence line, a tree she had walked past without particular attention for 3 years. The trunk had cracked open at the base sometime in the past decade, creating a hollow space about the width of 2 shoulders, not deep, not particularly sheltered, but enough of a recess that the wind went around it rather than through it. She had used it once herself, 2 winters ago, when a sudden squall had caught her on the ridge and she had stood in that hollow for 11 minutes waiting for the worst of it to pass. She crouched down in front of the hollow and looked inside. A jacket, a man's jacket, dark navy, the thick kind with the collar that folded up. She registered that first, because the mind processes the ordinary before it processes the impossible. Then she processed what was inside the jacket. A baby girl. Newborn. So new that the word barely felt adequate. Her face was the kind of face that has not yet decided what it is going to look like, all soft formlessness and the particular gravity of something that has only just arrived. Her eyes were closed. She was making that sound, not crying, not quite, something smaller and more private than crying, as though she was having a conversation with a difficulty she did not fully understand. She was cold. The jacket had slowed it down, but it had not stopped it. Her lips had lost their color. Lena did not hesitate. Everyone who would later know this story would remark on that. She did not stand there for a moment calculating, did not weigh the situation or consider her options, or experience the particular freeze that can come over a person when something impossible sits in front of them. She simply acted, because the situation was straightforward. A child was cold. She needed to not be cold. Lena was there. She pulled off her own coat. She wrapped it around the baby with the precise, efficient movements of someone who has spent years working in a medical setting and understands that the priority is the task and not the aesthetics of performing the task. She tucked the coat around the small body, brought the fabric up over the baby's head, held her close against her chest where her own body heat could reach her, and then she stood up and she ran. She had not run seriously in years. She ran now. Her boots hit the frozen ground hard enough that the sound carried through the trees, and the cold came at her face with nothing between them anymore, and she could feel it already. The long-term cold working into her shoulders, the particular misery of February in the Ashfield Hills when you have given your coat to someone else. She ran anyway. The infirmary was 9 minutes away at a walk. She covered it in 4. She hit the back door with her shoulder, grabbed the frame to stop herself from going straight into the supply shelving she knew was directly inside, and called out for Dr. Marin before she had even properly gotten through the door. Dr. Marin was already gone, but Clara, the night intake nurse who worked the 11 to 7 shift, was at the reception desk with a cup of tea and a novel, and she was on her feet before Lena had finished the first sentence of explanation. Within 6 minutes, the baby was under a warming lamp, attached to a monitoring line, with Clara doing the specific quick motion assessments that Clara did very well and did not need anyone's help with. Lena stood to the side and let her work, which was difficult because standing still felt like the wrong thing to be doing, but she had enough professional sense to know that 2 people doing Clara's job was worse than 1 person doing it properly. "How long do you think she was out there?" Clara asked, not looking up. "I don't know. The jacket was stiff." Lena paused. "Someone put her there on purpose. The jacket was tucked carefully. She wasn't dropped." Clara did not respond to that immediately. She was measuring, recording, working through her checklist. Then she said, very quietly, "Who puts a baby in a tree hollow on a night like this on purpose?" Lena did not answer. She was watching the monitoring line. She was watching the number that measured the baby's temperature, which was moving in the right direction but had started from a place that made Lena's throat tighten in a way that had nothing to do with her own cold. "She's going to be all right," Clara said. "Not a medical assessment. Something softer than that." "I know," Lena said. She said it the way a person says something they need to be true. The baby's fingers were the first thing that moved properly. They curled and uncurled under the warming lamp with the tentative, experimental quality of someone discovering that their hands work. Lena watched this happen. She had a hand on the edge of the warming table, not touching the baby, just close, just there. She did not know why she could not stop watching those fingers. She was not the kind of person who was easily moved by things. She had spent 3 years in the Ashfield Infirmary, and had learned to carry a certain professional distance from the difficult things she saw, because that distance was what let her keep coming back. But there was something about those small fingers moving under the warm light in that quiet room at nearly midnight in February, that she could not put professional distance between herself and. They were so alive. Whatever had happened to bring that baby to that hollow in that tree, she was alive, and her fingers worked, and that was a kind of miracle Lena did not have a file system for. She stayed until 2 in the morning. She sat in the plastic chair beside the monitoring station, and she drank the tea Clara made her. Because Clara made tea for everyone, it was practically involuntary. And she watched the numbers on the monitoring line improve by steady degrees, and she did not let herself think too hard about the jacket, about the care with which it had been tucked, about what kind of situation put a newborn child in a tree hollow in the middle of a February night. Those were questions that existed beyond her job description, which was to make sure that people in her care did not get worse. She was doing her job. She told herself she was doing her job. At 2 in the morning, the baby was stable. Her temperature was normal. Her color was better. She had made several sounds that qualified as real, indignant, proper crying, which was the best possible news. Clara told Lena she could go home, that there was nothing further she needed to do, that she had already done the thing, which was the essential thing. Lena stood at the warming table for another minute. She looked at the baby's face, which was still undecided about what it was going to become, and she thought about the long path home, and the split oak, and the particular way the cold had hit her without her coat. She thought, "Somebody left you there." She thought, "But I found you." She picked up her coat, which Clara had put on the rack near the door, and she put it on, and she went out into the dark. The cold was still waiting. She walked home. She did not sleep much. She lay in her bed in the apartment above the laundromat, and she stared at the ceiling, and she listened to the wind finding its way around the building, and her mind kept returning to that hollow in the tree, kept running the calculation of how long the baby had been there, kept replaying the sound she had almost not heard, the sound between a breath and a whimper that she might have convinced herself she'd imagined if she had been a slightly different kind of person. She was not a different kind of person. She got up at 6, made coffee, and went back to the infirmary before her shift officially started. The baby was awake. She had the serious, slightly accusatory expression of someone who has opinions about recent events. Her eyes were dark and alert, tracking the light above the warming station, with the focused attention of a person who has decided that if they are going to be in this situation, they are at least going to understand it. Lena stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her do this. Then she went in, sat down in the chair, and said, in a normal conversational tone, "I hear you had a difficult night." The baby looked at her. "Me too," Lena said. This became, without any formal decision being made about it, the beginning of a routine. Lena would come in before her shift and sit with the baby while the morning assessments were run. She would talk quietly, about nothing in particular, about the weather, about the specific irritations of her day, about the things she was planning to do that she probably would not get around to doing. She talked the way you talk to someone when you are not worried about being interesting, when the talking itself is the point. Dr. Marin noticed. She did not say anything directly, because Dr. Marin almost never said anything directly about personal matters, but she gave Lena a particular look one morning that communicated several things simultaneously, including something that might have been approval. On the third day, the pack alpha, Gareth, came to the infirmary. He was a large, solid man with the quality of something built for a purpose and not particularly concerned with anything beyond that purpose. He came with his beta, a younger man named Patrick who always looked mildly worried, and a woman from the pack administration office whose name Lena could never remember. They looked at the baby with the expression of people looking at a problem that has landed on their desk uninvited. Gareth asked the medical questions. Clara answered them. He asked who had found the child. Clara said Lena. He turned and looked at Lena. "You were on the East Ridge at that hour?" he said. "I take the long way home," Lena said. He nodded, as though this was information being filed for no particular purpose. He asked whether any identifying information had been found with the child. There had not been. He asked whether there were any indications of where she had come from. There were not. He told Patrick that an inquiry would need to be opened. Patrick wrote this down. The woman from the administration office said something about jurisdiction and protocol that Lena did not follow completely. They left without speaking to the baby. Lena watched them go. She felt something that was not quite irritation and not quite surprise. Something in between. A kind of tired familiarity with the way power moved through a room and did not always notice what was in the room with it. She turned back to the baby. "The important people were just here," she said. "They've added you to their to-do list." The baby blinked. "Welcome," Lena said, "to Ashfield Pack." The baby's expression suggested she had some reservations about this. The inquiry Gareth had ordered produced almost nothing in 3 days. No missing person reports from neighboring packs that matched the child's description. No witnesses on the East Ridge that night. Not that many people used the East Ridge at that hour in February. The jacket had no identifying marks, no pack insignia, no labels that helped. It was the kind of careful nothing that suggested someone had gone to some effort to make it nothing. On the fourth day, Lena came in for her pre-shift visit and found Clara at the reception desk with an expression Lena had never seen on Clara's face before. "Something happened," Lena said. "Not here," Clara said, "with the pack. A message came through this morning." She paused. "A convoy is coming from the Northern Crown Territory." Lena went still. The Northern Crown Territory was not a neighboring pack. It was not even the same category of thing as a neighboring pack. It was the seat of the Alpha King. In a world arranged into territories of various sizes and powers, the Northern Crown Territory was at the top of the arrangement, and it had been since King Calum Draven had consolidated the Northern Alliance 6 years ago, in the aftermath of events Lena knew about only in the way everyone knew about them. The way you know about something large and distant that changed things without being close enough to see it change. "Why?" Lena asked. "The message said the king is coming personally," Clara said. "It said the matter concerns a missing child." They looked at each other. Then they both looked down the hallway toward the room where the baby was. Lena thought about the dark navy jacket, about the care with which it had been tucked, about the East Ridge at midnight in February, and the particular sound that had come through the gap in the wind. She had found this child on the long path home. She had not known, at the time, what she was walking toward. She was beginning to understand that she still did not know. The convoy arrived on a Thursday morning with no fanfare, which was its own kind of statement. Lena was in the middle of a wound assessment on the far side of the infirmary when Clara appeared in the doorway and said quietly that they were here. Lena finished the wound assessment. She applied the dressing, made the note in the patient record, told the patient, a young pack member named Eddie who had done something inadvisable with a piece of farm equipment, to keep the area clean and come back in 4 days. Then she followed Clara to the front of the building. She had expected more. That was probably naive of her. She had built, in her head, a picture of what a royal convoy looked like. Flags, perhaps, or a great many vehicles, or the kind of organized spectacle that says very clearly, something important is happening here. Pay attention. What she saw through the infirmary's front window was 4 dark vehicles parked on the road outside, and a small group of people gathered near the building entrance, and that was all. She was about to step back from the window when the door opened. He came in ahead of the others. That was the first thing she noticed, that he entered a room the way someone enters a room when no one has told them to wait, when the idea of being announced before you arrive has simply never occurred to you, because you have never needed it. He was not in any kind of formal dress, dark trousers, a heavy jacket of the kind that is made for actual cold rather than for looking impressive in cold. He was tall, not in a way that seemed designed, but in the way that makes you recalibrate the scale of the room when someone steps into it. His face was angular and set in an expression of focused restraint, as though he was thinking about something at a depth that did not involve the room around him, and the room around him would simply have to wait. This was Calum Draven. Lena had seen photographs. Everyone had. He appeared in official communications, in the brief news reports that filtered through even to smaller packs, in the kind of documentation that came with royal mandates and territory decisions. But photographs had been taken by people who stood at a respectful distance, and they had produced an image that was easier to hold, something composed and careful, something that existed at the right length away. He was not at that length now. He was in the room. He was talking to Patrick, Gareth Spada, who was moving with the particular speed of a man who is extremely anxious to be helpful to someone. Patrick was explaining, with great efficiency, the circumstances of the child's discovery. Calum listened without expression. He asked one question, in a voice that was lower than Lena expected, and Patrick answered it. Calum nodded once. Then he turned and looked down the corridor. "Where is the child?" he asked, and the question was not directed at Patrick. It was directed at the hallway, at whatever was down the hallway, as though he already knew the answer and was simply making the walk official. "Down here," Clara said, and she led him down the corridor. Lena followed at the back. She was not sure what else to do. She had come this far into the situation, and walking away now felt like abandoning a post she hadn't known she was holding. The baby was in the third room on the left. She had been moved to a regular bassinet 2 days ago, which was a measure of how well she was doing. She was awake when they entered, in her customary state of serious examination of the world above her, which she conducted with the focused gravity of someone reviewing important documents. Calum Draven stopped in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment. His expression had changed, not dramatically, not in the theatrical way of someone feeling a large emotion they want the room to witness. It changed in the smaller, harder way of someone for whom something expected and dreaded has arrived, and must now be looked at directly. He breathed out. Then he walked to the bassinet. He looked at the child for a long time without speaking. Then, in a voice that had none of the authority his entry into the building had carried, that was simply quiet. "There she is." Lena watched him from near the door. She was, in a professional capacity, responsible for this patient. She was, in a human capacity, watching something private happening in a room she happened to be standing in, and she did not look away because the situation was not one that allowed looking away, and because what she was watching was not something she could name easily or file away under any of the categories she had built for managing the difficult moments of her work. He reached into the bassinet. He was going to lift the child. His arm came across the bassinet, and as it did, his forearm brushed the inside of Lena's wrist. She was standing closer than she'd realized, her hand resting on the edge of the bassinet in the way it had rested on the edge of the warming table on that first night. Close, but not touching. Just present. The contact lasted half a second, probably less, the back of his forearm against the inside of her wrist. Nothing. And then he stopped. He stopped completely. His arm did not continue its motion toward the child. He did not step back. He went still in the particular way that something goes still when an internal system is doing something it needs space to do. Lena felt, she registered, from a clinical and then from a less clinical part of her brain, that something was happening that she did not have an immediate explanation for. She looked at his face. He was looking at her. His expression was the expression of a man who has been presented with information his current understanding cannot process. Not confusion, exactly. There was too much precision in it for confusion. More like the look of someone who has opened a door they did not know existed in a wall they understood completely. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he looked away, and he lifted the child from the bassinet with careful, certain hands, and held her with the confidence of someone who has held a child before, and remembered how. "I have you," he said quietly, to the baby. "I have you now." The baby, in Lena's private opinion, appeared cautiously open to this development. Lena took a step back. She was not sure why. She took another. She went back to Eddie and his wound dressing, which needed no further attention but gave her somewhere to be. She told herself she had imagined it. She was very good at telling herself things. She had built a considerable life out of the reliable space between what had happened and what she chose to believe about what had happened. She was practical, and practical people did not construct theories around half-second moments of accidental contact with the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. She had work to do. She did her work. He stayed. That was the first unexpected thing. She had assumed, everyone had assumed, from the shape of the situation, from the way convoys worked, that the king would confirm the child was his ward, conduct whatever formalities were required, and take her. That was how a situation like this resolved itself. It was a clean resolution, simple and final, and it was what Lena had been telling herself was going to happen since the moment Clara had said the words Northern Crown Territory 3 days ago. He did not take her. His medical team, 2 of them had come with the convoy, and they were the kind of people who moved with quiet confidence and knew what they were doing, conducted a thorough assessment of the baby's condition. They conferred with Dr. Marin. They looked at the monitoring records, at the intake notes, at every piece of documentation the infirmary had produced over the past 4 days. They took their time. At the end of it, the one who appeared to be the senior of the 2, a calm woman named Dr. Petra, recommended continued observation for no less than 5 additional days before any travel was undertaken. The baby was recovering well, she said, but she was very young, and she had been exposed to serious cold, and the margin of safety for an infant in that condition required a careful approach to change. Moving her, even with excellent care in transit, was a variable that did not need to be introduced before it was safe. Lena, who overheard this conversation from the supply corridor where she was restocking the shelving with a level of attention the shelving did not require, thought, 5 days. She thought, he is not going to stay 5 days. She was wrong. He stayed. His people took rooms at the Pax Central Guest House, which Gareth opened without being asked because no one in their right mind waits to be asked when the Alpha King needs accommodation. The convoy vehicles moved from the road outside the infirmary to the guest house's parking area. Everything became organized, official, settled. And every morning, Calum Draven came to the infirmary. He came before the official visiting window, usually around 7, which was 2 hours before the guest house served breakfast, and 40 minutes before Lena's shift officially started, which meant she was always there when he arrived, because she was always there early. He would come down the corridor to the baby's room, and he would sit in the chair beside the bassinet, and he would do something Lena had not expected at all. He would talk to her. Not to Lena, to the baby, in the quiet, slightly ridiculous voice that adults use when they speak to infants, the voice that is lower and warmer and slower than the one used for everything else, the voice that carries the particular patience of someone who has decided that this conversation matters even though only one party is following it. He talked about small things. He talked about the guest house room, which was adequate but had a window that faced the wrong direction. He talked about the Northern Crown Territory, about the forests there, about what the spring looked like. He talked about a woman named Iris in a tone that was careful and quiet and full of something Lena could hear but not name. A shape of loss that he wore the way a person wears something they have worn for so long they no longer notice the weight. Lena understood, from what she knew of his history, who Iris was. She did not intrude on those mornings. She had work that kept her on the other side of the infirmary. She was there, but she was not in the way. On the second morning, she brought him a cup of coffee without thinking about it, the way she brought coffee to anyone who appeared to be in the infirmary before the coffee station was officially operational. She set it on the table beside his chair. He looked at it, then at her, with an expression she could not quite decode. "Thank you," he said. "The machine is basic," she said, which was true. "It produces something coffee-adjacent." He looked at the cup. "It's hot." "That part I can confirm," she said, and went back to her work. On the third morning he was already holding the coffee when she came down the corridor. He had found the machine himself. He looked slightly pleased about this, in the restrained way of someone who does not often look pleased and is slightly unsure what to do with the expression. "You found it," she said. "I followed the smell," he said. She went to take the child's morning vitals. She worked through the checks with the same quiet efficiency she always used, aware in a peripheral way that he was watching her, aware that she was aware of this, and needed to not be. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 3 years, she said. "In Ashfield?" "Yes." A pause. "Where before that?" She looked up from the chart she was writing. He was watching her with genuine attention, the kind of attention that is hard to meet for more than a moment if you are not used to it, which Lena was not. She was used to being looked through, or at most looked at briefly, the quick inventory a person takes of someone they do not expect to interest them. "Various places," she said. It was not an answer. He let it sit without pressing. The baby made a sound. They both looked at her. She was examining the ceiling with her customary seriousness. "She needs a name," Lena said, before she could stop herself. He was quiet for a moment. "I know. There is a formal naming ceremony in the Northern Crown Territory. Iris would have..." He stopped, then carefully. "It should be done properly. Of course, Lena said. She thought about the name she had been using privately, in her head, in the quiet conversations she had with the baby in the early mornings. Wren. She had not told anyone. It was not her place to name this child. But it was a good name. It felt like the right size. She said nothing about it and went back to the chart. On the fourth morning he arrived, and Lena was not in the corridor when he came in. She was in the supply room at the back, doing inventory, which was a task that needed doing, and that she genuinely did not mind, because it was the kind of work that emptied the thinking parts of the mind and let the quieter parts do what they needed to do. She heard him come in. She heard him exchange the brief, formal greeting he always gave Clara. She heard his footsteps go down the corridor. She gave herself 5 minutes. She took the supply inventory clipboard and she found reasons to stay in the supply room for 5 minutes, cross-referencing the bandage quantities against the order form, because she was a professional person who was not about to reorganize her morning around the arrival schedule of a visiting dignitary. Then she went and made the coffee, because someone had to. She came down the corridor with both cups. He was in the chair. The baby was awake, tracking the light. She set one cup on the table beside him. He looked at it, then at her. "I can make my own," he said. Not ungrateful, just noting it. "I know," she said. "I was making mine. It's the same effort." She sat down in the chair on the other side of the bassinet with her own cup and looked at the monitoring line, which was showing exactly what it should show, which was a child in steadily improving health. He did not say anything more. She did not say anything more. They sat on opposite sides of the bassinet in the quiet morning infirmary and drank their coffee, and the baby examined the ceiling, and outside the window the Ashfield Pack was waking up into a gray February day, and none of that felt like it was happening at a manageable distance. On the evening of the fourth day, Lena was leaving through the back door. She always left through the back door, habit and preference, and she was halfway down the rear path when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Calum Draven was coming down the path, his jacket collar up against the cold, his breath visible in the air. He stopped when she turned. "I wasn't." He paused. "I noticed you left. I was going the same direction." The guest house was, in fact, in the approximate same direction as her apartment building, for about 4 blocks, before the routes diverged. "All right," she said. They walked. For 2 blocks neither of them spoke, which was not as uncomfortable as it probably should have been. The cold was clean and clear and the pack was quiet around them. Then he said, "Why do you take the long way home?" She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead. "The short path ices over," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's not the only reason." She did not answer. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't." 2 more blocks of quiet. Their routes diverged at the corner near the hardware store. She stopped. He stopped. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. He did not move for a moment. Then, "Thank you for finding her." She held his gaze for 1 second. 2. She was very good at not letting things land on her face. "It's cold," she said. "Go inside." She turned and walked the last block to her building and did not look back, and the question he had almost asked, the one that lived in the space between "Why do you take the long way?" and "That's not the only reason," followed her all the way up the stairs and sat with her until she finally, much later than she intended, went to sleep. On the 5th day, Dr. Petra cleared the baby for travel. She made the announcement in the morning, in Dr. Marin's office, with the careful formality of someone who understands that their medical opinion is about to change the shape of a situation. She said that the infant had made excellent progress, that all indicators were positive, that with proper arrangements she could be safely transported to the Northern Crown Territory. She said that she would recommend departure within 48 hours to minimize continued disruption to the pack's resources. Lena was not in the office when this happened. She heard it from Clara, who had heard it from Patrick, who had been in the hallway outside Dr. Marin's office with his customary expression of anxious efficiency. She heard it at 9:27 in the morning while she was restocking the medication cabinet, and she received the information, and she put the rest of the medication in the cabinet, and she closed the cabinet, and she went and sat in the empty assessment room at the end of the hallway for 4 minutes before she went back to work. She did not examine why she needed 4 minutes. She was practical. She went back to work. Calum was in the baby's room when she came down the corridor. He was standing rather than sitting, which was different, and he had his arms folded in the way of someone who is keeping themselves contained, and he was looking out the room's single window at the gray February sky, with the expression of someone doing the arithmetic on something that doesn't add up the way they want it to. Lena came in and did the morning vitals without preamble. She moved through the checks with her usual efficiency. The baby watched her. Caleb did not turn from the window. When she was done, she said, "All normal. She had a good night." "I know," he said. "Petra told me." A pause. "You're leaving soon," Lena said. It was not a question. He turned from the window then. He looked at her with the direct, steady regard she had been carefully not thinking about for 5 days. "My beta is arranging the transport details," he said. "We'll leave tomorrow morning." "That's good," she said. She meant it. She did mean it. The child deserved to go where she belonged, to the place that had been waiting for her, to the person who was going to be responsible for her. That was the correct ending to this part of the story. She'll do well. She's strong. "Yes," he said. Then, "You talk to her." The shift in topic caught her off guard. She looked at him. "In the mornings," he said. "Before I arrive. I've heard you, from the corridor." He paused. "You talk to her about the weather." Lena considered several possible responses to this. She settled on, "She seems interested in it." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. It was too restrained for a smile. Too careful. But in the direction of one. "She does," he agreed. Then, after a pause, "What do you call her?" Lena was quiet. "I noticed," he said, "that you use a name, a small one, when you think no one is listening." She should have been more careful. She knew this room's acoustics. She had worked in it for 3 years. She knew that voices carried in particular ways. She had been careless, or rather she had been careful about everything, except the things she had not realized she needed to be careful about. "It's not her name," Lena said. "It's just, I needed something to call her, in my head." "What is it?" She thought about not answering. She thought about the professional distance she maintained, the useful space between herself and the things that happened in this infirmary, the file system she had built for managing the weight of her work. "Ren," she said. He looked at the baby. The baby, with her characteristic gravity, looked back at him. "Ren," he said quietly. He tried the word out in his mouth, the way you try out a word in a new language to see if it fits. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Iris would have liked that. He said it like something that had been in a locked room for a long time, and he had opened the door just far enough to say the sentence, and then he was going to close it again. Lena did not ask about Iris. She understood, from the shape of the silence around that name, that questions were not what was needed. She went back to the chart. She wrote down the morning numbers. She did not fill the silence with anything. When she looked up again, he was watching her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask," she said. "Why do you stay here, in Ashfield?" He said it without judgment, without the edge of someone making a comparison. Just a genuine question, the kind that comes from actual curiosity rather than from trying to establish something. "You're good at what you do. You could be somewhere." He stopped himself. "I'm sorry. That's not my question to ask." "No," she said. "It's all right." She put the chart down. She considered the question, not performing consideration, actually doing it, which was the difference between a question worth answering and one that wasn't. "Ashfield is quiet," she said finally, "and I've had enough of the other kind." He held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded, once, in the way of someone who understands that this is all they are going to get, and it is enough. That afternoon, the pack threw what Gareth called a small gathering at the central hall, which in practice meant 70 people, and a great deal of food, and the kind of atmosphere that happens when a large group of wolves wants to be seen making a good impression on a king. Lena went because her absence would have been noted and questioned, and she had enough things to manage without adding that to the list. She spent most of the evening near the back of the room, talking to Clara, who was good company, and had no investment in impressing anyone, and eating the very good cheese that someone had brought from the southern markets, and watching the room with the half-attention she always gave to crowded social spaces, which was enough to be present and not enough to be exhausted. Caleb moved through the room with the particular grace of someone who has been doing this since they were very young, the measured attention to each conversation, the eye contact that communicates that you are, for this moment, the only person in the room worth speaking to, then the smooth transition to the next person, without making the first feel abandoned. He was very good at it. He had probably been doing it for 20 years. He looked, twice, across the room to where she was standing. She looked away both times. She was very interested in the cheese. Clara noticed. Clara noticed everything, which was what made her excellent at intake nursing, and also occasionally exhausting at social events. "He keeps looking over here," Clara said, with the tone of someone making a neutral observation about the weather. "Does he?" said Lena. "He does," said Clara. "Is there something I'm not aware of?" "No," said Lena. Right, said Clara, in the voice of someone who believes the opposite but has decided to let it sit. Lena ate more cheese. The gathering went on for 2 more hours. Calum spoke to Gareth at length, a conversation that had the body language of territory matters, of the kind of decisions that get made when significant powers are in the same room, and it would be inefficient not to use the opportunity. His beta, a man named Oren who was precise and watchful and said very little, stayed nearby, doing what betas do at these events, which is track every conversation simultaneously and remember all of it. At 10 o'clock, Lena said goodnight to Clara and took her coat from the rack and went out the side door of the central hall. The cold was waiting, as always. She was becoming sentimental about it, which was a sign that she was overtired and needed to go home and sleep. She was halfway across the parking area when she heard her name. Not her full name, just Lena, which was the way people said it when they were close enough to speak at normal volume rather than calling across a distance. She turned. He was at the side door she had just come through. He had his jacket in his hand, not yet on, as though he had followed her before he had finished putting it on. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. He came out into the cold and put his jacket on. He was quiet for a moment, the way he was quiet when he was deciding what he was actually going to say, as opposed to what had first presented itself as an option. When I came into the room yesterday, he said, and my arm. He paused. There was contact, brief contact. She said nothing. Something happened, he said. When that happened, the cold between them was very clear and very present. She could see her breath. She could see his. I know what it was, he said quietly. I have had it explained to me by every healer in 3 territories, for 6 years, that it was not going to happen again. That the mark was, that it was finished, that the biological mechanism had. He stopped. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you because you were there, and it happened. And it would be wrong of me to leave tomorrow without saying that I know it happened. Lena looked at him for a long moment. The parking area was empty around them. In the hall behind him, the sounds of the gathering continued, muffled through the walls. Voices, the particular percussion of a large room full of people. I know what it was too, she said. He went still. She had spent 5 days telling herself she did not know. She had done the telling with considerable skill, building the argument carefully, maintaining it against the evidence of every morning in that room with 2 cups of coffee, and the baby watching the ceiling. She had been very thorough, and it had worked, more or less, until this moment, when he was standing in the cold without his jacket fully on, telling her that he was not going to pretend, and she found she could not pretend either. Not to his face, not in the cold, with their breath visible and the truth sitting right there between them. I know what it was, she said again, and I also know that you are leaving tomorrow, and I am an Omega in a small pack infirmary, and those are facts that don't have a tidy resolution. He was watching her. She held his gaze. She had practice with this now. 5 days of practice with the particular quality of his attention, and she had gotten better at standing in it without needing to step back. No, he said. They don't. She waited for him to say something else. He didn't. He was not, she had come to understand, a man who filled silence with words he had not earned. Go back to your gathering, she said. It was a good evening. Gareth will have appreciated it. He did not move for a moment. Then he said, I'll come in the morning, before we leave, to see her. I'll be there, Lena said. I'm always there early. He nodded. He went back inside. She stood in the parking area for another moment, not because she was building an exit from the feeling. She had learned, years ago, that this particular strategy only delayed things, but because she needed to let it settle to a level she could carry. The cold helped. The cold always helped with this. It was blunt and uncomplicated, and it had no interest in what she was feeling. It just wanted her inside. She went home. She did not tell herself she had imagined it. That ship, she decided, had sailed. She lay in her bed above the laundromat, and she thought about the mark. About what a reactivated claiming mark meant in the tradition she had grown up learning. About what it meant when a bond like that, declared finished, declared dead by every medical authority in 3 territories, came back. She thought about what he had said. I'm not asking you for anything. She thought about the fact that he was leaving in the morning, and she was staying, and between those 2 facts lay a distance that was not merely geographical. She thought about Ren, in the bassinet down the corridor, examining the ceiling in the dark with her characteristic seriousness. She thought, tomorrow he will take her away, and it will be quiet again, and I will take the long path home, and in a week the guest house will have different guests, and in a month the East Ridge will be the same ridge I have always walked. She thought, that is probably the right thing. She thought that for a long time. She thought it until it started to feel less like a conclusion and more like a question she was asking very loudly to cover the sound of something else. At some point, she slept. In the morning, she was at the infirmary at 6:30. She made the coffee. She went down to the baby's room. Ren was awake. She looked at Lena with the dark, serious eyes that had spent the past 5 days taking an inventory of the world, and she made a sound that was not crying and not quite contentment. Something in between. Something that had the quality of a greeting. Lena sat down in the chair. "Today is your last day here," she said. "You're going to your proper home." She paused. "It's a very significant place. You'll have a lot of people looking after you, and a very comfortable room, and eventually you'll have all of that explained to you. And it will probably be overwhelming, but you'll be all right." Another pause. "You're going to be all right. You were all right in a tree hollow at -14. Everything after that is manageable." Ren looked at her. Lena looked back. She heard his footsteps in the corridor at 7:04. She did not look up when he came in. She was already writing the morning notes in the chart, and there was nothing in the chart that required her immediate attention, but she wrote it anyway because she needed a moment to organize herself. He came in. He sat in his chair. He did not say anything. After a minute, she passed him the coffee she had made, without looking up from the chart. He took it. She heard him take a breath. Then he said, quietly, "Lena." She looked up. "I would like to write to you," he said. "When I'm back in the territory. I would like to. I'm asking your permission to write to you." She looked at him for a long moment, then at Ren, then back at him. "Permission," she said. "Yes." She thought about it. She gave it actual thought, not the performed kind, the real kind. Then she said, "All right." He nodded, once, and looked down at his coffee, and the morning went on around them in its ordinary way, the monitoring line running its steady, reassuring pattern, the infirmary waking up outside the door, the February light coming through the window at its usual insufficient angle. It was a small thing, permission to write. Lena was a practical person. She understood that small things were the architecture of everything. The convoy left at 9 in the morning, and the Ashfield pack stood on the main road to watch it go, because that is what small packs do when something large has passed through them. They witnessed the leaving the same way they witnessed the arriving, with the collective awareness that something significant has occurred, and that watching it end is part of understanding it. Lena watched from the infirmary window. She did not go to the main road. She had said her goodbyes inside, in the baby's now empty room, which Clara had already begun setting back to its standard configuration, with the brisk efficiency of someone who knows that the way to manage an ending is to give yourself work immediately afterward. The last vehicle in the convoy was the fourth and smallest, a plain dark vehicle with no markings. It passed the infirmary's front window and disappeared around the corner toward the southern road, and then the sound of the engines faded, and Ashfield was the same size it had always been. She went back to work. She did her work for the rest of that day, and the day after that, and the day after that. She took the long path home. She ate dinner in her apartment and read and went to bed and got up and went back to the infirmary. She was very productive that week. She reorganized the supply room, which she had been meaning to do for 2 months. She updated 3 patient records that had been waiting for her attention. She repainted the wall behind the medication cabinet, which had developed a crack that had been bothering her since November. Clara watched all of this with the expression of someone keeping their opinions organized in a drawer. On the 9th day after the convoy left, a letter arrived. It came in the regular pack mail delivery, addressed in handwriting that was precise without being ornate, the handwriting of someone who was taught to write carefully and never lost the habit. The return address was the Northern Crown Territory Administrative Office. Lena sat at the reception desk and looked at it for a moment before she opened it. It was not long. He was not, she was coming to understand, a man who used more words than the situation needed. He wrote that the journey had gone well, that Ren, he used the name, without explanation, without ceremony, simply used it as though it had always been the child's name, had tolerated the transit better than expected, and had arrived in excellent condition. He wrote that the naming ceremony was being arranged, that there had been some discussion about the name to be used, and that he had given instructions. At the bottom of the letter, after the information he had come to deliver, he had written, "I hope the East Ridge iced over on your walk home." She read that line twice. She was not entirely sure how to file it. It was not anything she had expected from a formal letter. It sat at the bottom of the page like a small, very private joke, the kind of thing that only works between 2 people who have had a specific conversation at a specific moment on a cold night in a parking area. She wrote back that same evening. She sat at her kitchen table with the window showing her the February dark, and she wrote that she was glad to hear they had arrived safely. that the East Ridge had in fact iced over on Monday and she had managed it, that the supply room reorganization was complete and she was considering tackling the medication cabinet next, that Eddie's wound had healed well, and he had been told firmly about farm equipment. She read the letter back to herself. It was, by any objective measure, not an interesting letter. It described the contents of a small life, with the dry accuracy of someone who was not sure how much to offer, and had therefore offered the facts. She sent it. His next letter arrived 6 days later. He wrote about the territory, about the specific February there, which was colder than Ashfield's and different in quality, less sharp, more sustained. He wrote about Wren's naming ceremony, which had been held in the formal hall with the people who were required to attend these things and who had attended them correctly. He wrote that Wren had conducted herself with dignity throughout, by which he appeared to mean that she had not cried during the formal portion. And he wrote about this with a warmth that was very contained but visible at the edges, like light coming under a door. At the bottom he wrote, "How is the medication cabinet?" She wrote back about the medication cabinet. She wrote about the crack behind it, which had extended 2 inches while she was away from it, which was the kind of thing cracks did when you turned your back on them. She wrote about Clara, who had reorganized the front desk in a way that improved efficiency, but created a drawer situation that Lena was still adjusting to. She wrote, at the bottom, "How is the window that faced the wrong direction?" The letters continued. Every 6 days, approximately, though sometimes it was 5, and sometimes 8, depending on what was happening in the territory. She learned the rhythm of his life through these increments, the territory councils that happened monthly and lasted too long, the visiting delegations from the Eastern Alliance that were tedious but necessary, the physical training that he apparently did at 6 every morning because it was the one part of his day that belonged entirely to him. He wrote about Wren with regularity. He wrote about her progress the way someone writes about something they are paying close attention to, the specific details, the small changes, the particular expressions on her face that he was learning to interpret. Lena read these sections more than once. She wrote back about her own days with the same specificity, because that was what the letters seemed to want, not summaries, not general impressions, but the actual granular content of a life. She wrote about patients without names because of privacy, describing situations with enough detail that the human interest was there without the identifying information. She wrote about the East Ridge, which she still walked every night, and about the particular quality of the cold in February versus March, which was different in ways she had never had anyone to explain to before, because she had not been in the habit of explaining things. March came. The ice on the short path melted, as it always did in the 3rd week of March when the temperature shifted. She continued taking the long way anyway. It was in the 4th letter of March that something shifted. He wrote, near the end of the letter, after the information and the updates and the report on Wren's apparent fascination with a particular mobile above her bassinet, "I've been trying to understand why I keep waiting for these letters. I think it's that they sound like you. I don't have a more sophisticated explanation than that." She read this sentence in the morning at the kitchen table with her coffee. She read it several times. She set the letter down and looked out the window at the March morning. She did not answer it that day. She carried the sentence around with her through her shift, and it was present at the back of her mind the way a persistent and interesting problem is present, the kind that doesn't go away when you ignore it, but becomes more defined. She understood what he meant. She had felt it, reading his letters, the sense of a voice becoming clearer, the feeling of learning a person's specific rhythm through the accumulation of small specific things, the way you come to understand someone not from a single large revelation, but from the way they describe a window that faces the wrong direction and what they care about when they think they're only reporting facts. She wrote back that evening. She wrote everything she normally wrote, and then at the bottom she wrote, "I know what you mean. I'm not sure what to do with it either." She sent it before she could rewrite it. His response came in 5 days. She opened it at the reception desk, as she usually did, because the mail arrived during her shift and there was no logical reason to save it for later. She read it. Then she put it in her pocket and went to the empty assessment room at the end of the hallway and sat in the plastic chair for 4 minutes. The letter said, "I'd like to see you. Not officially, not as a visit of state or a PAC concern. I'd like to come to Ashfield or have you come here, whichever makes more sense. And I'd like to have a conversation that is not conducted through paper 6 days apart. I understand if the answer is no. I'm asking anyway." Lena sat in the plastic chair for 4 minutes. Then she went back to the reception desk and she put the letter in her bag and she finished her shift, and she went home by the long path, and she ate dinner, and she sat at the kitchen table where the letters lived in the drawer on the right-hand side, and she thought. She was a practical person. She built her thinking on the things that were real and could be verified. The things that were real were the mark, which she had felt and which did not lie, the letters, which existed and which she had reread more times than she was prepared to admit, the fact that she was 31 years old and an Omega in a small pack infirmary and had spent 3 years building a life that was manageable and reasonable and did not require anything of her that she wasn't prepared to give. The other thing that was real, the 4 minutes she had spent in the assessment room chair. 4 minutes, both times. The precise duration of her knowing something was happening and needing a moment to manage the knowing. The other practical thing was that a bond mark, once real, did not stop being real, because the parties to it lived in different territories and wrote to each other every 6 days. It was not a thing that could be maintained at distance indefinitely. It was a thing that required, eventually, an answer. She wrote back, "Come to Ashfield. The guest house is still adequate." She sent it. She went to bed. In the morning she made coffee and she thought about the supply room, which no longer needed reorganizing, and the medication cabinet, which was in order, and all the things she had been productive about since the convoy had left, and she understood, with the particular clarity of the morning, which stripped away the careful constructions of the previous day, that she had been waiting for this letter since the 4th day after the convoy left. She was not, she acknowledged quietly, going to be able to be a person who did not wait for the letters. That was the thing about the mark. It did not ask for permission. It had already made its decision. The only question was what she was going to do about that, and she had been deferring that question for 6 weeks with the help of a reorganized supply room and a repainted wall. Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway with her coat already on. "You're early," Lena said. "You look like you've been thinking since before sunrise," Clara said, which usually means something happened. She paused. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lena said. "He's coming back to Ashfield." Clara processed this with the speed of someone who had been paying attention. Then she said, Okay, Lena said. "You've been repainting walls for 6 weeks," Clara said. "Okay." Lena looked at her. "The wall behind the medication cabinet did need doing," she said. "It did," Clara agreed cheerfully and pulled on her gloves. They walked to the infirmary together, and Lena thought about the letter in her bag, and about the guest house being adequate, and about the difference between a managed life and a life that was asking to be something more. The East Ridge was clear that morning. The last of the ice had gone from the path. She could, if she wanted to, take the short route now. She took the long one. He arrived on a Tuesday, not with a convoy this time. He came in a single vehicle with Oren, his beta, and one other person whose role Lena could not immediately identify but who stood with the watchful stillness of someone responsible for security. He had given her the date in his last letter, a brief note, very practical, the departure time, the estimated arrival, a question about whether the guest house required advance notice. She had arranged the advance notice. She had told herself she was not counting the days. She had been counting the days. She was in the infirmary when he arrived. She knew he was coming at noon, and at noon she was with a patient, an elderly pack member named George who came every Tuesday for his blood pressure checks, and who had a great deal to say about his neighbor's fence. She listened to George about the fence. She took his blood pressure. She noted it in the chart and told him it was good and to come back next Tuesday. George said he would, and left, slowly, with the unhurried dignity of a man who had decided that hurrying was for other people. At 12:15, Lena put George's chart away, and she went and stood in the empty corridor for a moment, and then she went to the front of the infirmary, because the front was where the door was, and the door was where people came in. She had been in the situation of waiting for someone to arrive before. She knew what it felt like. This felt like that, and also like something else that she did not have a precise word for. A specific alertness, a sharpening of the ordinary air in the room, as though the room knew something was about to happen, and had adjusted its quality accordingly. The door opened at 12:22. He looked different in April than he had looked in February. She registered this immediately, and then tried to determine what exactly she was registering. He had the same face, the same angular set of it, the same quality of contained focus. But February had been crisis, and February had been loss, and February had been a child in a tree hollow, and a parking lot in the cold, and letters that had not yet been written. April was something else. He came in with the deliberate ease of someone who knows where they are going, and he looked at her, and the quality of the look was straightforward in a way that February had been building toward, and had not yet arrived at. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she said. Oren had the decency to find something immediately necessary to do near the door, which Lena appreciated. "I have a patient at 2, she said, "and one at 3:30. "I know," he said. He had taken off his jacket in the warm infirmary. He looked very much like a person who had driven several hours and was now in a room where someone he had been writing to for 6 weeks was standing 4 feet away. And this was a different thing from letters. "I'm not here to disrupt your day. You're here," she said, "which already disrupts my day." "Is that a complaint?" "No," she said. They looked at each other. "There's coffee," she said. "It's still basic." "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about it." He said this so seriously, about the coffee, that she almost smiled. "Lead the way." They sat in the small staff room that no one was using, and they had the conversation that the letters had been building toward, the one that was not about the window or the medication cabinet or the East Ridge, the one that was about the mark and what it meant and what they were going to do about it. And they had it in the plain, direct way of two people who were both, fundamentally, practical, and who had been writing honestly to each other for 6 weeks, and had run out of room for anything except honesty. It was a long conversation. It was the most important conversation Lena had ever had in the staff room. Her 2 o'clock patient arrived. She excused herself and did her job. He sat in the waiting area and read something on his phone, and was perfectly quiet about it. Her 3:30 patient was Clara, who had developed a convenient need for a medication review, and who looked at Lena with bright, entirely innocent eyes when Lena gave her a look. She reviewed Clara's medications. Clara thanked her and left unhurriedly. At 4 o'clock, Lena's shift ended. She got her coat from the rack. He got his jacket from the waiting area chair. They went out the back door together. "I take the long way home," she said. "I know," he said. "You're not in appropriate shoes," she observed. His shoes were entirely reasonable for a person who had driven here but were not the boots that the East Ridge required. "I'll manage," he said. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. He had, she thought, a very particular quality of patience. Not the passive patience of someone waiting things out, but the active patience of someone who has decided this is worth the required time, and does not find the time difficult. "All right," she said. They took the long way home. It was April, and the ridge was different in April. The ice was gone. The ground was soft in places. The pines were the particular pale green of new growth, and the light lasted longer, and came from higher, and did not have February's siege quality. It was a different ridge entirely. She walked it every night, and it was different every night, and she had never had anyone to show the different to before. She told him about the crack in the oak tree. She showed him where it was, and he stood in front of the hollow that had held the navy jacket 5 weeks ago, and he was quiet for a moment. "This is where you heard her," he said. "This is where I heard her," she said. He looked at the hollow for a long moment. Then he stepped back and they walked on. She showed him the frozen stream, which was not frozen anymore. It was running clear over the brown winter stones, working out the accumulated cold of the past 4 months with a particular energy that water had in April. He stood on the wooden bridge and looked at it. "Iris used to say," he started, and stopped. He looked at the water. "She used to say that the best rivers were the ones that didn't pretend to be calm." He paused. "I thought about that for years. I think I understand it now." Lena stood beside him on the bridge. Their shoulders were close together but not touching. "Tell me about her," Lena said. He did. He told her, standing on the bridge over the April stream, about his sister, not about her death, which he had presumably told many times and which was documented and known, but about her life, the actual texture of it, the way she had laughed and the opinions she had held and the particular fierceness with which she had loved Ren from the first moment she had known Ren was coming. He talked about her for a long time, and Lena listened, because listening was one of the things she was genuinely good at, and because it was very clear that this was something he had needed to say and had not had the right person to say it to. When he finished, they were still on the bridge, and the light was going that particular April gold that doesn't last long. "She would have been exasperated by me," he said, "in the best way. She was always exasperated by me in the best way." "Why?" Lena asked. "Because I don't let things in easily." He looked at her. She would have said something very pointed about the 6 weeks of letters. Something pointed like what? He considered. Something like, "You wrote to her about the medication cabinet, Calum. You wrote a paragraph about the medication cabinet. Just go to Ashfield." Lena felt the thing that was in the direction of a smile but fuller than that. She let it land on her face, because she was on a bridge in April with no one around, and she had run out of reasons to keep it off. He saw it. He looked at her with an expression that had something in it she had not seen there before. Something lighter, something that had come up from wherever he kept things and arrived at the surface of his face as though it intended to stay. They walked the rest of the ridge in the April light, and when they reached the corner near the hardware store where the routes diverged, They did not diverge. He walked her to her building. They stood at the door. "I'm here for 3 days," he said. "I know," she said. "I'd like to take the long way again tomorrow." She looked at him. The long way, which had always been hers alone, which she had built out of the need to avoid being seen, and had kept because it was where she breathed, was being offered something new, without being asked to become something different. "Same time," she said. 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock, he agreed. She went inside. She went up the stairs to her apartment, and she stood at the kitchen window, and she looked out at the April evening, and she thought about the long way becoming something that was still hers, and also something else at the same time, and she decided, in the quiet of the kitchen, that this was something she could hold. In the drawer on the right-hand side of the kitchen table, the letters sat in the order she had received them, each one placed carefully, because that was how she did things. She thought she would need a larger drawer soon. The 3 days became a pattern. He came back to Ashfield 6 weeks after the April visit, and then 8 weeks after that, and then 5. The intervals were not perfectly regular because his schedule did not permit perfect regularity. Territory councils, alliance meetings, the kind of governance that did not pause for personal arrangements. But he came, and each time she knew he was coming from the letter that arrived 3 or 4 days before, precise about the date and the time he expected to arrive, the same practical information that she had come to associate with the moment the letter appeared in the mail. She reorganized nothing during those months. She did her work. She took the long path. She wrote letters on Tuesdays, which was when the mail service was most reliable in Ashfield's direction, and she received them on varying days of the week. She put them in the drawer. The drawer, which she had been right about, was becoming insufficient. Clara stopped making observations about productivity. She began instead making observations about Lena's general demeanor, which was different in ways that Clara catalogued with the attention of a person who had been watching a garden very carefully for 3 years and was now noticing specific new growth. "You look like you slept last night," Clara said, one morning in June. "I usually sleep," Lena said. "You usually sleep adequately," Clara said. "There's a difference." Lena gave her a look. Clara gave her a look back that contained multitudes. Wren was growing. She learned this from the letters, which became increasingly detailed on the subject of Wren's development, with the helpless regularity of someone who did not intend to write 3 paragraphs about the facial expression an infant made when she first tasted something cold but found himself doing it anyway. She was rolling over by the time the summer visits had established their rhythm. She was sitting up by the end of summer. She was pulling herself upright on the furniture, on Calum's leg, which the letter described with a specificity that made Lena feel she had been in the room, by early autumn. He brought her once. In September, when the territory business permitted it, and when Wren's routine was stable enough for travel, he came to Ashfield, and he brought her with him, with Dr. Petra for the medical peace of mind, and a woman named Harriet who was Wren's primary caregiver, and who ran the nursery in the Crown Territory, with the energetic precision of someone who had been doing it for 20 years, and had opinions about everything. Lena was at the infirmary when they arrived. She saw the vehicle pull up through the front window. She watched Harriet come out of the rear door with a bag of improbable size, and Calum come around from the driver's side, and then open the back door and lean in. He came up the infirmary path with Wren in his arms, and Wren was looking at the world with the same serious, evaluating expression she had worn in February when she was 24 hours old, and she had more face now. It had decided things, had settled into a particular arrangement that was already distinctly hers, but the expression was the same. Lena opened the front door. Wren looked at her. And then, Lena would think about this later, would turn it over and look at it from various angles with the methodical attention she gave to things that mattered. Wren's face changed. The serious examination gave way to something different, something that was not quite recognition, because she had been too new in February for recognition, but that was in the category of recognition. Something warmer, an opening toward. She reached out toward Lena with both hands in the way of someone who has recently discovered that hands can reach and has been applying this discovery to everything. Lena took her. She held her the way she held any patient, with both arms, securely, in the position she knew from 3 years of infirmary work that was correct and stable and safe. But it was nothing like holding a patient, and she knew it the moment she did it, and Wren settled against her shoulder with the immediate trust of someone arriving at a known place. Calum watched this. His expression was the one she had come to know, the careful one, the one that was feeling something larger than its container. "She knows you," Harriet said, in the tone of someone who has been working with infants long enough to understand the meaning of what she is observing. "I talked to her," Lena said. She was aware that she was using a slightly different voice than usual. In February, every morning. That's how it works, Harriet said approvingly. They keep it. Wren put one hand on Lena's face and examined her with total concentration, in the way she apparently examined everything. The full resources of her current understanding applied to the question of what this was. Lena stood still and let her look. "Hi," she said, very quietly. "Hello. I hoped you'd remember." He was standing 2 feet away. She could feel him watching her. She did not look up. The September visit lasted 4 days. Wren learned, in those 4 days, that the infirmary had interesting ceiling lights that were different from the ones at home, and that Clara was a source of warmth and sound, and that the corridor between the front desk and the back room was exactly long enough for an excellent crawl if you were given appropriate floor space and encouragement. Harriet, who had expected to spend the 4 days maintaining Wren's routine in the guest house, instead spent most of it in the infirmary waiting room with a cup of tea and an expression of pleased surprise that Wren had found additional people willing to be charmed by her. Calum came to the infirmary every day, as he had in February. He sat in the waiting room with Oren and read, and worked on whatever required his attention, and in the afternoons he and Lena and Wren took the long path over the ridge. On the 3rd day, coming back over the wooden bridge in the September afternoon, he said, "I want to ask you something." "Ask," she said. Wren was sitting on her hip, watching a bird that had appeared in a nearby pine with intense personal interest. "When the bonding ceremony is held," he said, choosing the words with the care of someone who has been arranging them for some time, "there are certain things that are required. Formal things. They take place in the Northern Crown Territory, in the ceremony hall, with the people who need to be there." He paused. "But before that, there is a conversation that needs to happen between exactly 2 people, without a hall or formalities, or anyone who needs to be there." The bird in the pine flew away. Wren watched it go with the philosophical acceptance of someone learning that interesting things are impermanent. "This is that conversation," he said. Lena looked at him. He was looking at her with the directness she had come to know, the look that did not deflect or manage itself. "I'm not asking in the way that expects a particular answer," he said. "I mean that. You are the most deliberate person I've ever met, and I would not presume to—" He stopped. "I'm asking because the question is real, and I want you to have it, however long it takes." "Ask it," she said. "Will you let this be what it is?" he said. "Not the mark. Not what the mark means legally or traditionally, or what it requires. Just this. What we've built. The letters and the ridge and the coffee that is still basic and the things you have let me say out loud for the first time in 6 years." He was very steady, asking this. Very still. "Will you let it become what it's asking to become?" Wren had found something interesting in Lena's hair. She was working on it with the focused patience of a researcher. Lena looked at the stream below the bridge. The September stream, which was different again from the April one. Quieter, the urgency gone, running clear and serious over its stones. She thought about the question. She gave it the same attention she gave to any real question, not the managed version of thinking, but the actual version, where the conclusions arrive whether you want them to or not. She thought about February, about the cold and the hollow oak and the jacket, and the sound between a breath and a whimper that she had almost not heard. She thought about how she had not hesitated. She thought about what it meant that she had not hesitated, what that quality of not hesitating said about who she was, about what she was willing to do when something needed doing, about the space between being a person who kept themselves manageable and being a person who walked toward things in the dark. She had walked toward a sound in the dark and found a child. She had let a man write to her about a medication cabinet and found something she did not have a precise word for that was larger than she had let herself admit until this bridge in September. "Yes," she said. He breathed. "Okay," he said, as though it was simple, as though it had always been going to be this word on this bridge, and all the letters and the long walks and the 5 months had been the route to this point. "I have requirements," she said, "for what it becomes." "I know," he said. "Tell me." "I keep my certification. I keep working." "Yes." "I have a room that is mine, with a door." "Yes." "Wren's adoption is completed before any formal ceremony is discussed, in your court, in your traditions, properly. She goes first." He looked at her. "Always," he said. "She always goes first. And I come to the territory on my own terms, my timeline, my decision about when." "Yes." He paused. "Those are your requirements." "There's one more," she said. "What is it?" She looked at him with the steadiness that had cost her nothing to develop and that he had, over 5 months, somehow made feel less like a defense. Don't let me feel like a small thing in a large place, she said. That's the one I can't negotiate on. He held her gaze. He held it long enough that she knew he understood she was not speaking only about architecture. I'll spend my life making sure of it, he said. That's not a promise I make because it's required. It's the one I mean to keep. Wren had successfully reorganized a significant portion of Lena's hair. She made a sound of satisfaction. They walked off the bridge. They walked the ridge in the September light, the long way, always the long way, and the pack was laid out below them in its ordinary late afternoon arrangements, and the pine trees were going from green to the first edge of gold, and nothing about the world was different. Everything about it was. That evening, after Harriet had taken Wren back to the guest house and Orrin had done whatever Orrin did in the evenings, Lena and Calum sat on the steps of the infirmary's back door in the September dark, and they talked about the territory, and what she would need, and what would change, and what she intended to make sure did not change. She had a great many things she needed to say, and she said all of them, because she had learned something over the course of 5 months of letters, that he received what she said without rearranging it into what he wanted to hear, which was rarer than it ought to be. He told her about the ceremony hall. He told her about the council members who would need to be addressed. He told her, with the particular candor that came naturally to him when he was saying something he found genuinely difficult, that there would be people who had opinions about an Omega from a small pack, and that he had already, as a matter of orientation rather than defense, made his position on those opinions clear to everyone who was likely to hold one. She appreciated this. She appreciated it the way she appreciated practical things done with care. She looked up at the Ashfield sky, which was clear and deep and full of the autumn stars. I'm going to miss the ridge, she said. It will be here, he said, when you want it. She nodded. She looked at the stars. She breathed the cold September air, and let herself feel the weight of the things she had agreed to on the bridge, not in the direction of fear, but in the direction of recognition. It was a large thing. It was the largest thing she had ever agreed to. She understood, the person who had heard a sound in the dark and not waited to understand it before walking toward it. She was good at walking toward things. The Territory Council found out on a Monday. Not from an announcement. Calum was not, as far as Lena could tell from the letters that followed the September visit, a man who made announcements before he was ready to answer the questions that came with them. They found out because the mark was visible, and the mark did not ask permission from anyone. When he returned to the Northern Crown Territory after the Ashfield visit, the mark had continued its pattern of expansion. Now it traced his shoulder, his jaw, the inside of his wrist, the entire left side of his neck, and people who were observant enough to be on the Territory Council were observant enough to know what they were looking at. The letter that came on that Wednesday was different from the others. She could tell it was different before she opened it, from some quality of the envelope, the way it sat in the stack perhaps, or something about the handwriting that was more deliberate than usual. She opened it at the reception desk as she always did. He wrote, "The council knows. I've told them the situation directly and without diplomatic softening, which Orrin feels was possibly premature, but which I felt was the only honest approach. There are questions. I'm answering them. I wanted you to know before you heard it through any other channel, which in my experience is how these things travel if you are not careful." Then, below a space, "None of what they think or feel about the situation changes the conversation we had on the bridge. I wanted to be clear about that." She set the letter down. She looked at the reception desk, at the ordinary objects on it, the intake forms, the pen holder, Clara's labeled coffee mug, the small cactus that had lived there for 2 years and asked nothing of anyone. She processed the information. Then she picked the letter up and finished reading it, because there was more. "I've been asked by the senior council member, a man named Arthur, who has been in this position for 18 years and has the confidence that comes from knowing he is very often right, whether the Omega in question is aware of the responsibilities that come with this arrangement. I told him that the Omega in question is the most practically intelligent person I have encountered in years, and that she will manage the responsibilities considerably better than most of the people he has invited to these council rooms." He paused, as she could tell from the slight shift in the handwriting, and then, he looked satisfied with this answer. He is not a man who is easily satisfied, so I considered this progress. She read this twice. She wrote back that evening, "Tell Arthur he should wait and see. I'm better on paper than in person in formal settings. Also, I've met council members. I'll be fine." She sent it, and then she sat at the kitchen table with the drawer of letters and she thought about the next thing. The next thing was the territory. She had seen pictures. Everyone had seen pictures. The official kind, the formal halls and the exterior shots of the buildings that housed the northern government. the particular light the territory got in winter, when the sun was low and distant. She knew, in the abstract way of knowing things about a place you have never been, that it was large and formal and organized around a set of traditions that predated her by several generations. She had agreed to go there. She had set her requirements. He had met them without flinching. She had not, until this week, thought concretely about what it would feel like to be small in a very large place, which was the one thing she had told him she could not negotiate on. She was not afraid of it in the way that fear usually operated, the sharp, immediate kind. She was afraid of it in the slow, pervasive way of someone who understands precisely the nature of the thing they are walking toward, and knows that understanding it does not make it easier. She had been small in large places before. She had spent most of her 20s being small in large places and learning how to carry that without letting it become the organizing principle of her life. She had come to Ashfield because Ashfield was not a large place, and she had built something manageable and reasonable here, and she had told herself that this was not retreat, that this was choice. It had been both. She was honest enough with herself to know that. She wrote another letter, not to him, or not only to him. She wrote it for herself, at the kitchen table, the way she sometimes wrote things out when the thinking needed a surface to happen on. She wrote about the territory and about the mark and about the bridge in September. She wrote about what she was bringing into it, the certification, the room with the door, the requirement about not being made small. She wrote about Wren, about what it would mean to be in Wren's life, to be the person who had been the first voice she heard, and the first hands that had held her warm, and what came with that, the responsibility of it, the weight of it, the particular kind of love that had grown from 5 months of letters about a child she was not officially connected to. She wrote, "I am not going there to be an omega in a palace. I am going there to be myself in a new place. Those are different things." She sat with that for a while. Then she wrote, "Clara is going to be impossible about this." She was right. Clara found out on a Thursday, not from Lena directly, which Lena would later consider a failure of friendship, but from the fact that Lena was on the phone in the staff room for 40 minutes with the Northern Crown Territory Administration Office, arranging a visit, and the staff room walls were not as thick as they might have been. Clara knocked. Lena said, "Come in." Clara came in and sat in the chair across from Lena's chair and looked at her with an expression that was both entirely unsurprised and entirely emotional at the same time, which was a difficult combination to achieve but which Clara managed without apparent effort. "So you're going," Clara said. "I'm going to visit first," Lena said. "I haven't decided." "You've decided," Clara said, not unkindly, with the certainty of someone who has been watching a decision happen in slow motion for 9 months and has arrived, ahead of the person making it, at the conclusion. Lena was quiet. "You've been deciding since February," Clara said, "when you sat in the assessment room chair for 4 minutes and then went back to work. I timed it." She paused. "Both times." "You timed it," Lena said. "I was curious," Clara said, without any embarrassment. 4 minutes, both times, the exact same interval. She leaned forward. "Lena, you found a child in the dark in February, and it brought you here. That's not a small thing. That's not even a large thing. That's the whole thing." Lena looked at the table. She thought about the hollow oak, about the navy jacket and the small fingers moving under the warming light, and the monitoring line running its steady pattern, and the coffee machine, and the letters in the drawer, and the bridge in September. "I'm going to visit first," she said again. "Yes," Clara agreed, "and then you're going." She stood up. "I'm going to need at least 3 months' notice so I can train someone. Dr. Marin is not going to take this well." "I haven't decided." 3 months' notice, Lena," Clara said, and went out. Lena sat at the table for exactly 4 minutes. Then she went back to work. The Northern Crown Territory was larger than she had prepared for, and she had prepared carefully. She arrived in November, 3 weeks after the letter in which she had written, "I am coming on the 14th, with the directness of someone who has made a decision and is not going to equivocate around it. She had driven the first half of the journey herself, in her own car, which was a practical vehicle that had survived 7 Ashfield winters without complaint. And then she had taken the Territory Road north, which was better maintained than the roads she was used to, which should not have surprised her and did anyway. Orrin met her at the Territory border. She had not expected this. He was standing beside a vehicle, very correct and composed, and he said, "Welcome to the Northern Crown Territory." He said it as though he meant it, which she appreciated. "Did he send you?" she asked. "He offered to come himself," Orrin said. "I suggested it might be better to have a slightly less fraught arrival." He agreed. He paused. "Eventually." She looked at him. He looked back with the watchful, contained expression of a man who had been doing his job for many years and had developed a finely calibrated sense of what situations required. "He's waiting at the residence," Oren said. "I can take your car to the guest parking, or you can follow me." "I'll follow you," she said. She followed him. The residence was not a palace in the way that word usually operated. It was not the fairy tale kind, not towers and battlements, and the theatrical ambition of something designed to impress rather than function. It was large. It was old in a way that meant every part of it had a reason, had been built for a use or a person or a season, and had accumulated into a whole that was coherent but not symmetrical, not perfectly arranged but full of intention. It had a north wing that was clearly older than the south wing. It had a covered courtyard that made no architectural sense and was completely beautiful. It had, from the road, a quality of having been lived in by many generations of people who had gradually made their specific adjustments and left their particular marks, so that the building was not so much one thing as the history of many things. She pulled into the guest parking area and sat in her car for a moment. Then she got out and got her bag from the boot and went inside. He was in the entry hall. He was not waiting in the theatrical sense. He was not standing with his hands clasped, not positioned dramatically. He was standing near a set of shelves that held maps, looking at one of them with apparent genuine interest, and he looked up when she came in. He had been listening for the door. She could tell by the speed of it. "You drove," he said. "I drive," she said. "I know," he said. I thought you might." He stopped. He looked at her with the look she knew. "Hello." "Hello," she said. He did not make a production of it. He took her bag, which she allowed because she was tired, and it was a big bag, and he showed her to the room. The room. She had specified a room. She had been specific about what the room required. It needed a door that closed. It needed natural light. It needed to not be adjacent to any room in which official functions were held so that she could, when she needed to, step outside of things without an audience. He had found a room on the northeast corner of the south wing, which got morning light and evening quiet, which was 2 corridors away from the formal hall, which had a door that was solid and old and closed with the satisfying certainty of good carpentry. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. It had a desk. She had not specified a desk, but there was one. A plain, serious desk by the window, the kind you could actually work at, not the decorative kind. There was a bookshelf that was empty, which she understood immediately. It was empty because filling it was her decision to make. On the desk was a small object she recognized. It was a cactus. She looked at the cactus. She looked at him. "Clara sent it," he said. "She felt you'd want something familiar." He paused. "She also sent a letter that I was not intended to read but was placed inside the plant's pot and came out when I tried to put the plant on the desk." "What did the letter say?" Lena asked. "It said, 'Be good to her or you'll answer to me, and I know where the medication cabinet is.'" He said this with total seriousness. I found it compelling. She looked at the desk, at the cactus, at the empty bookshelf, and the window with its morning light, and the door that closed the right way. "It's good," she said. "The room. It's good." She heard what that cost him to hear, not in an obvious way, not in any way he performed, but in the slight change in the quality of the air in the room, the easing of something that had been held carefully. "I hoped," he said. Then, "I'll let you get settled. There's no schedule today. Come and find me when you're ready, or don't, if you need time." She nodded. He left. He closed the door. She stood in her room in the Northern Crown Territory, and she listened to the quiet of it, the particular quiet of old buildings, which is different from the quiet of modern ones, fuller and more layered, the accumulated quiet of many hours in many years. And she breathed, and she unpacked her bag, and she put her things in the places that made sense for her things, and she put the cactus on the corner of the desk where the light would hit it in the morning. She found him 3 hours later, in a room on the far side of the residence that appeared to be where he actually spent his time, when the formal requirements were not operating. It was not grand. It had books and a desk covered in papers, and a window that faced a garden that was, in November, the austere and honest version of itself that only November produced. He was at the desk when she came in. He looked up. She sat down in the chair across from the desk. "The room is good," she said again. "I'm glad. The desk was a good idea." Oren suggested the desk. "Tell Oren it was a good suggestion." She looked out the window at the November garden. "Can I see Wren?" she said. "She's in the nursery," he said. "Now, if you want." "Yes," she said, "now." They went together to the nursery, which was in the north wing, the older part, which had low ceilings and warm colors, and the feeling of rooms that had held children for a long time, and knew what children needed. Harriet was there, and Wren was on a mat in the center of the room engaged in the focused project of moving from one side of the mat to the other, which at 9 months was a matter of serious, deliberate effort and complete dedication. She reached the edge of the mat and looked up and found Lena. The expression was the same one she'd had in September, the opening, the warmth of something recognized. She reached both hands up. Lena sat down on the mat. Wren put her hands on Lena's knees and pulled herself upright with the determined effort of someone who is going to stand up and has decided that this is the moment, and stood there, holding on to Lena's knees, looking at her with the total satisfaction of a person who has accomplished something important. "There you are," Lena said, quietly. Wren made a sound. It was not a word. It was in the direction of words, working toward them from the available equipment. But it was meant to communicate something, and it communicated it clearly enough. "I know you. I know this. This is right." Calum sat on the mat on Wren's other side. Harriet made herself busy with the shelving in a way that gave the room privacy without leaving it. The three of them sat on the nursery mat in the north wing, and Wren held on to Lena's knees and examined the world from her new upright position, and the November light came through the low windows, and Lena thought, "Here I am." She thought, "Here." She did not tell herself she would visit and go back to Ashfield. She had known, on the bridge in September, that she would not. She had known when she packed her bag in the Ashfield apartment that she was packing the things she actually needed, not the things you need for a week. She had known when she put the drawer of letters into the bag, all of them, carefully in their order. She had known when she told Clara 3 months, and Clara had said, "I knew it in February," and then gone very quiet for a moment in the way that Clara went quiet when she was feeling something she was not going to perform. She stayed for 2 weeks on that first visit, 2 weeks in which she walked the territory grounds and met the council members one by one, not in any formal capacity but in the way people met when Calum simply took her into a room and said, "This is Lena," without qualifier or preamble, which she understood was his method, and which she found she respected enormously. Arthur, the senior council member, shook her hand and looked at her for a moment with the appraisal of a man who had been doing this a long time. "He said you were practically intelligent," Arthur said. "That was generous," Lena said. "He was not being generous," Arthur said. "He doesn't do generous with compliments. He was being accurate." He paused. "We'll see." "Yes," she said. "We will." She walked the territory grounds every morning in the November cold, which was colder than Ashfield, and different in quality, as the letters had said. She worked through what her life was going to look like here, where she would practice, whether the territory infirmary would welcome a certified healer with 3 years of experience, what the pace of things would be and how it would sit against the pace she had built for herself in Ashfield. She had the conversation with Calum about this on the last evening of the 2 weeks, in his study, the room with the November garden outside. "The territory infirmary," she said. "I want to work there, not as a formal function of the residence, as a healer with my own patients and my own hours." "I've already spoken to the head physician," he said, "Dr. Elise. She's interested." Lena looked at him. "You spoke to her before I asked?" "I mentioned you might want to discuss it," he said. "I didn't make arrangements. That's yours to make." She looked at him for a moment. Then, "All right." "All right," he echoed. She drove back to Ashfield with the late November sun at her back and the territory behind her, and she thought, for the entire drive, about the room on the northeast corner, and the empty bookshelf, and the cactus on the desk, and Wren standing on the nursery mat holding onto her knees. She thought about practically intelligent, about the way Arthur had said it, as though it was the thing that mattered, not anything else, not status or rank or what she was or was not, just the thing she actually was. She arrived home at 8 in the evening. She sat in her apartment for the first time in 2 weeks, and looked at the drawer of letters on the kitchen table. She wrote to him that night, "I am coming back after the new year. That's my decision." He wrote back in 4 days, "I'll have the room ready. Harriet wants to know if you have any requirements about the nursery schedule." She looked at this for a long moment. "Harriet, the nursery schedule." She wrote back, "Tell Harriet I defer to her expertise, but I'd like mornings with her, when it works." His response came in 3 days, which was fast for the northern mail. Harriet said of course, and seemed very pleased. "I believe you've made an ally." She put the letter in the drawer. She looked at the apartment, she looked at the cactus, which she was going to have to move, and the books, which she was going to have to pack, and the long path home, which she was going to have to leave. She thought, "I'll come back to it. Ashfield will be here." She thought, "The territory has its own cold. I'll learn what it wants." She thought, For a long time, about the hollow oak. About how a single sound in a February night had drawn a line through her life with the clean precision of something that had always been going to happen, that had been waiting for the right conditions, for her to be there, for it to be cold enough, for her to be the kind of person who took the long way. She had taken the long way. She was still on it. January came. She told Dr. Marin in December. She did it directly, in the office, without preamble, because she owed Dr. Marin that. 3 years of reasonable working relationship, of Dr. Marin not asking personal questions and Lena not requiring anything beyond her work, and that arrangement deserved a direct conversation rather than a letter. Dr. Marin listened. She made no expression that Lena could read clearly. Then she said, "I'll need to replace you." "Clara will have recommendations," Lena said. "She's been thinking about it." "Has she?" Dr. Marin looked at the window for a moment. Then, "You found that child?" "Yes," Lena said. "I think about that sometimes," Dr. Marin said. "The East Ridge at that hour. The fact that you took the long way." She paused. "Good for you." It was, from Dr. Marin, an enormity. Lena received it as such. The packing was not as extensive as she had expected. She had always traveled light, both literally and in the way that meant she had not filled the Ashfield apartment with things that would be difficult to let go of. She packed her books, her medical texts, her practical clothes for cold weather, the letters in their order, the small collection of objects that mattered, a photograph she kept on the bedside table, a particular mug, a blanket her mother had made from a kit 30 years ago and that was objectively ugly and completely irreplaceable. She did not pack the apartment, because the apartment was not hers. She had rented it, and she had told the landlord she was leaving, and he had said, "All right," in the way of a man who had many things on his mind, and this was one more. She did not pack Ashfield, because you could not pack a place. You could only carry what it had given you. Clara took her to dinner on the last evening. They went to the restaurant on the south side of the square that had been there since before either of them arrived in Ashfield, and that made a particular soup in winter that Lena had been eating every week for 3 years. She had the soup. Clara had the fish. They talked about the new healer, whose name was Ruth, and who had trained in the Eastern packs and came with excellent references, and would, Clara said, probably be better at certain aspects of the job than Lena had been. "Which aspects?" Lena asked. "The social ones," Clara said. "The making small talk with patients who want to make small talk ones. You're very good at your job. You are not always good at pretending to enjoy small talk." "I don't always enjoy it," Lena said. "I know," Clara said. "Ruth does. It'll be a good balance." They had dessert. They talked about things that were not the fact that this was the last evening, because they had already said those things in the supply room 2 weeks ago when Clara had come in ostensibly to check the bandage inventory and had stayed for 40 minutes. This was the version of goodbye that was on the other side of the main goodbye, the comfortable, warm, ordinary version, the kind that goes on the record as proof that something good existed. Clara walked her back to the apartment building. At the door, she hugged her, properly, the kind of hug that does not rush itself, and she said, "Write to me. Every week," Lena said. "Tell me everything." Clara stepped back. "And tell me about Ren. I want updates on Ren. I'll send photographs," Lena said. "Good." Clara pressed her lips together for a moment, doing the thing she did when she was feeling something large and managing it with efficiency. Then, "You were never small, Lena. I need you to know I know that. Whatever you think happened here, the long path, the staying out of the way, you were never small." Lena stood at her door and felt this land. "Thank you," she said. Then, "Thank you for timing the 4 minutes." Clara laughed. It was a real one. She turned and walked back toward the square, and Lena watched her go, and then she went upstairs for the last time. She slept well. She had expected not to, but she did. She left the next morning in the early dark, which was how she had arrived in Ashfield 3 years ago and how she was leaving, symmetrical without having planned it. She loaded the car, she locked the apartment, she dropped the key at the landlord's postbox. She took the long path. Not to go anywhere. She could not drive the long path. It was not a road. But she walked it one more time in the January dark, with a coat and proper boots and her breath visible in the air, over the wooden bridge, past the split oak with its hollow, past the fence the eastern wind had shifted sideways, through the trees that cracked in the cold. She stopped at the oak. She stood in front of the hollow for a minute. It was empty, as it had been every time she had passed it since February. She had looked, every time, because you do not stop looking until you are sure. Empty. She thought about the navy jacket, about the fingers moving under the warming light, about everything that had come from a sound between a breath and a whimper in the gap in the wind. She thought, if I had taken the short way. She thought, but I didn't. She turned, and she walked back to her car, and she drove north. She arrived at the territory by midday. Oren was not at the border this time. She did not need him to be. She knew the way now, from the November visit. She drove the territory road through the bare winter trees and the particular northern light, and she found the guest parking and she parked and she got her bag from the boot. He was not doing something unrelated when she came in this time. He was standing in the entry hall, and he had been waiting, and she could tell, and he did not try to make it look like something else. "You're here," he said. "I'm here," she said. He took her bag. She let him. She was tired from the drive, and the bag was heavy with books, and she was here. She was here. "Come and see Ren," he said. "She's been out of sorts this morning, and Harriet thinks it might be the weather change, and I think Harriet is right. But also Harriet seemed to think that you arriving today might help, which I am taking as a vote of confidence from someone whose professional judgment I trust entirely." Lena looked at him. He was being slightly more talkative than usual, which she had learned was what happened when he was trying to manage feeling something he was very glad to feel. "Let's go see Ren," she said. They went. In the nursery, in the warm north wing room with the low ceilings, Ren was sitting in the center of her mat with the expression of someone who has views about the current situation. She saw Lena in the doorway. Her face changed. She lifted both arms. Lena sat down on the mat, and Ren came to her. Not crawling. She was working on walking, pulling herself from the mat to Lena's knee, to Lena's arm, determinedly, with the singular focus of someone who has decided where they are going and is going there, and arrived, standing, holding on to Lena's shoulders, looking at her with complete certainty. "Hello," Lena said. "I live here now." Ren put her forehead against Lena's forehead. Harriet, by the shelving, said absolutely nothing, which Lena would later recognize as Harriet's highest form of approval. Caleb sat down on the mat. They sat on the floor in the nursery in the January light, and Ren moved between them with the territorial confidence of a child who knows exactly what she has. And outside the territory was cold and bare and full of the particular northern winter that she had not yet learned the texture of, and inside was the low warm room and the mat, and the child who lifted both arms. Lena thought about the drawer of letters in her bag. She thought about the room with the morning light and the empty bookshelf she was about to fill. She thought about small and large and the distance between them, and about the things she had told herself on the East Ridge, not retreat, choice. And she thought that the distance between small and large was mostly a question of whose definition you were using. She was going to use her own. She was very good at that. The Northern Crown Territory Infirmary was not what she had expected. She had expected something formal and institutional, the kind of medical facility that came with large windows and polished floors, and the careful arrangement of something designed to communicate competence to people who needed to believe in it. She had expected it to feel the way formal things in significant places usually felt, correct and efficient and not particularly warm. It was 3 buildings connected by covered walkways, and it had been built in pieces over 40 years, and it had the particular character of medical spaces that had been shaped by the people who worked in them over a long time. The walls were painted a color that someone, at some point, had made a genuine decision about. The waiting area had chairs that were actually comfortable. There was a window in the consultation room that looked out at a courtyard, and in the courtyard there was a tree that had been there longer than the building that now surrounded it. Dr. Elise met her on the first morning. She was a small, direct woman in her late 50s, with the quality of someone who had been practicing medicine for long enough that she had developed strong opinions about most things, and expressed them without much ceremony. "I've reviewed your records," Dr. Elise said. 3 years in Ashfield PAC. Before that? Several places, Lena said. Some smaller PACs. A stint in a regional hospital. Your wound care documentation is thorough, Dr. Elise said. Better than thorough. Most people take shortcuts on wound care documentation. Shortcuts cause problems, Lena said. Dr. Elise looked at her with the particular attention of someone adjusting an estimate. Yes, she said. They do. She showed Lena around the facility with the brisk efficiency of someone who has limited time and does not spend it on tourism. She showed her the supply system, which was organized differently from Ashfield's, and which Lena filed away to learn. She showed her the patient record system, the consultation schedule, the specialist referral process, which was more streamlined than what she had been used to, because the territory had more resources. One thing, Dr. Elise said at the end of the tour, the patients here will know who you are. Some of them will find that interesting. It may affect how they present to you. I know, Lena said. I'll manage it. How? The same way I've always managed it, Lena said, by doing the work well enough that the other thing becomes irrelevant. Dr. Elise looked at her for a moment, then she said, "You start Monday, 6 patients on the first week, to establish the pace. We'll expand from there." She started Monday. The first patient was a woman named Nora, who was 62, and who had a recurring ankle issue that had been managed inconsistently for 3 years, and which Nora was very ready to have managed consistently. Nora did know who Lena was, and she did find it interesting, and she said so directly in the first 5 minutes. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know," Nora said, "so I'll just say it and then we can move on." "Please," Lena said. "You're the one from Ashfield Pack," Nora said. "The infirmary. You found the little girl." She paused. "Everyone knows that. And then there's the other thing." "Yes," Lena said. "Both things are true." "All right," Nora said. "Now about my ankle." "Tell me about your ankle," Lena said. Nora told her about the ankle, in great and useful detail, and Lena listened and examined and asked the questions that the ankle required. And at the end of the appointment she had a treatment plan that she felt genuinely good about, and Nora had an appointment for 2 weeks' time. As Nora was leaving she said, "You're a good listener. I didn't expect that specifically." "What did you expect?" Lena asked. "I'm not sure," Nora said. "Something more formal." She considered. "You seem like yourself." "I try to be," Lena said. She went home. The words settled in her head with less unfamiliarity than she'd expected. Going home to the northeast room with the morning light, and she sat at the desk with the now populated bookshelf beside her, and she wrote to Clara about Nora and her ankle and Dr. Elise and the tree in the courtyard. She wrote that the infirmary was not what she had expected, and that she meant this in a good way. She wrote, "I think I'm going to be all right here." She sent it, and then looked at what she had written, and felt the particular quality of a thing that has been cautiously suspected, and has now been confirmed. The spring was different in the territory. She learned this the way she had learned the difference between February and March on the East Ridge, in increments, by paying the specific attention she had always paid to the particular quality of weather and light in the place she was. The spring came later here and differently. The trees came back more slowly. The light shifted in a way that was less aggressive than Ashfield's and more considered, as though the North understood that warmth was a serious matter and was not going to be careless with it. Wren turned 1 year old in April. The birthday celebration was not what Lena had expected either. She had prepared herself for something formal. The territory did things formally when occasions required it, and a first birthday in the royal residence seemed like an occasion that required it. What Calum had arranged instead was the nursery, and Harriet, and Arthur, who was apparently family in the meaningful sense rather than the official one, and a handful of people who mattered to him personally, and a cake that Harriet had organized and that Wren regarded with extreme suspicion before applying both hands to it with decisive curiosity. Lena sat on the nursery mat with the people who had come, and she watched Wren turn one in a room full of people who loved her, and she felt the weight of a year, not in a way that was heavy, but in the way that significant things have weight because they have substance, because they are real. She thought about the hollow oak, about 1 year ago, almost to the week. She thought, she was freezing, and she is here, she is one, she has cake on her face, she is here. She caught Calum looking at her across the mat. He was having the same thought. She could tell because she was very good by now at reading the particular quality of his expression, and because the thought was obvious. This was a birthday that almost did not happen, and they both knew it, and the weight of the knowing was something they shared now in a way that did not need to be spoken. He reached across the mat, past the birthday debris of paper and cake, and he put his hand over hers briefly. Not dramatically, not as a statement, just present, just for a moment, the way you acknowledge something between two people who do not need it said. She turned her hand over. She held his hand for that moment. Then Wren decided she needed to redistribute the cake situation and demanded their combined attention, and they gave it, and the birthday went on. The bonding ceremony discussion began in May. She had known it was coming. The mark was there, it was visible, it was documented. It had been visible and documented since February of the previous year, and the Territory Council had been patient, and Arthur had been patient, and Oren had been patient, all in the particular way of people who understand that patience is required and are providing it because the result is worth providing it for. He raised it one evening in the study. He was direct about it in the way he was always direct, no circling, no management. He said, "The council has been asking. I keep telling them it's not their timeline." "Is it their timeline?" she asked. "No," he said, "it's ours." He paused. "When you're ready." She sat with this. She had been here for 4 months. She had Nora's ankle under control and 17 other patients on her list, and Dr. Elise's cautious but visible approval, and a bookshelf that was full, and a morning routine that had found its shape. She had Wren, 3 mornings a week on the nursery mat, and Harriet's trust, and Arthur's measured regard, and a counsel that was coming around to her in the incremental way of groups who need to see evidence before they commit. She had the northeast room and the closed door and the morning light and the cactus on the desk. "I'm almost ready," she said. He looked at her. What would make the difference? She thought about it. She gave it the real kind of thinking. "Wren," she said. "Her adoption needs to be finalized. Officially. Fully. Before anything else is official and full. It's in process," he said. "The legal finalization is scheduled for June." "June," she said. "June," he confirmed. She nodded. She looked at the November garden, which was now the May garden, entirely different, green and alive and full of the spring that had come slowly and carefully to this territory. She thought about all the versions of this view she had sat with in this chair. "After June," she said. "After June," he agreed. She went to bed that night and lay in the northeast room looking at the ceiling, and she thought about the ceremony that was going to happen, and about what it meant, and about the life she had moved into, carefully, practically, on her own terms, with her requirements met. She thought about being small in a large place, which had been her one absolute, and she took an honest inventory of the 4 months. She was not small here. She was the person Nora had said she seemed like, herself. She was herself in this large place, with her door and her morning light and her patients and her Tuesdays on the nursery mat. She was the person who had been here 4 months and already knew that the tree in the infirmary courtyard was older than the buildings around it, and that Arthur took his coffee without anything in it, and that Harriet was always right about what Wren needed, even when her reasoning was cryptic. She was learning the territory's cold. She thought, "I am going to be all right." She thought, "I already am." June arrived with the particular light of the northern summer, long and clear and still with an edge to it, as though the territory did not fully trust warmth and wanted to make sure it understood the conditions. The legal finalization of Wren's adoption was not a ceremony in the theatrical sense. It was a meeting in the legal office on the territory grounds with 3 official witnesses and a document that had been prepared by the territory's chief legal officer, a careful, methodical man named Gregory, who had been practicing law here for 22 years, and had the steady precision of someone who understood that documents outlasted the moments that produced them and needed to be exactly right. Gregory read through the document with the attention it deserved. Calum sat across from him, signed where he was required to sign, answered the questions he was required to answer. Then Gregory looked up. He looked at Lena. He paused. He was navigating the territory's legal terminology with care, because the situation required care. "As the person who will also be signing as a guardian of record, I want to ensure you have had adequate time to review the document." Lena had reviewed the document. She had reviewed it twice, once with Gregory and once on her own in the northeast room with the morning light. It was clear and thorough, and it said exactly what it was supposed to say. "I have," she said. "I'm ready." She signed where she was required to sign. Gregory witnessed it. The 2 other official witnesses witnessed it. Gregory assembled the document with the quiet efficiency of someone who has performed this function many times and understands that the moment after the signing requires a kind of respectful stillness. "Congratulations," he said formally. Then, slightly less formally, "She's a remarkable child, from what I understand of the circumstances." Calum said, "She is." They went back through the territory grounds in the June light. Wren was in the nursery with Harriet, having her afternoon rest, unaware that paperwork had just reorganized the world around her. She would understand eventually. For now, she was asleep, her small face entirely unbothered, the particular heavy sleep of children who have been fully fed and are warm, and have no reasons to be watchful. They stood in the nursery doorway together, Lena and Calum, and looked at her. "She's ours," he said, very quietly. "Yes," Lena said. The words settled into the room without fanfare, without drama. Just a true thing, taking up the space a true thing takes. They did not wake her up. The bonding ceremony was set for late July. It was not a grand production in the way the territory's formal events were sometimes grand. Lena had been clear that she did not want that, and he had been clear that his preference aligned completely, and Arthur had been somewhat surprised by this, but had come around when Calum explained it with the particular calm that Arthur respected. It was the ceremony hall, because the ceremony hall was required by tradition, and tradition mattered here in a way Lena was coming to understand as not merely ceremonial, but structural. The traditions held things together that would otherwise drift apart. gave the community its coordinates, and she had learned to respect that, even when specific traditions needed adjusting for specific circumstances. The people who came were the people who mattered, not a show of numbers, the right numbers. Arthur, who dressed formally and looked satisfied in a way that Lena was coming to understand was his version of moved. Oren, who had been present for everything since February of the previous year, and whose watchful stillness had a warmth in it now that was visible if you knew where to look. Dr. Elise, who came because Lena asked her, and who sat in the front row, with her arms folded in the posture of someone who approves of what they are watching, and is not going to make a production of it. Harriet, who held Wren through the formal portion, and whose expression was that of someone watching the conclusion of a story they have had a role in. Clara came from Ashfield. She arrived the evening before, and Lena met her at the territory border, not Oren this time, Lena herself, and drove her in. Clara sat in the passenger seat and looked at the territory road and the trees and the particular northern light of a July evening. "It's big," Clara said. "It is," Lena agreed. "Are you still yourself here?" Clara asked, not accusatory, genuine. "Yes," Lena said. She said it without hesitation, which was its own kind of answer. "Good," Clara said. She looked out the window. Then, "How's the medication cabinet?" "Excellent," Lena said. "Dr. Elise maintains a very organized supply system. Is it better than ours?" "Different," Lena said. "The labeling system is better, the shelf spacing is worse." "Obviously," Clara said, with the satisfaction of someone whose systems have been partially vindicated. On the morning of the ceremony, Lena was in the northeast room. She stood at the window with her coffee and she looked at the morning light that came through the glass at the angle she had learned over 7 months, the light she had started her days in, the light that was hers in the way that the East Ridge had been hers, not because it belonged to her, but because she had built a relationship with it. She thought about February. She did it the same way she had done it since that night, not with nostalgia, not with the gilded quality of looking back at things that have become significant. She thought about it factually. The cold, the sound, the hollow oak, the not hesitating. She thought, it was -14 and I gave my coat away and I ran. She thought, that was always going to lead somewhere. She put on the dress she had chosen. It was the green of the particular tree in the infirmary courtyard, which she had noticed one morning and filed away and thought about for 6 months before she understood it was the color she wanted. It was plain. It was well made. It was hers. Clara knocked. "Come in," Lena said. Clara came in and looked at her, and her expression was Clara's expression. Complex, warm, the 40 minutes in the supply room kind. "You look like yourself," Clara said. "That's what I was aiming for," Lena said. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She walked into the ceremony hall through the side door, not the formal entrance. That was a choice she had made, and that the territory's protocol officer had found unconventional, and that Calum had said was fine. She came in from the side, in the July light, into the room where the people who mattered were waiting, and she stood at the front of it in her green dress and she looked at the room. Calum was standing at the center of the hall. He was formally dressed, because the occasion was formal and he understood formality, but he was wearing it the way he wore his jacket in February, the way of someone for whom this is simply the appropriate equipment for the moment, not a performance. He looked at her and she looked at him. She thought about the letters, all of them, in the drawer, now too many for the drawer, now in a box on the shelf in the northeast room. She thought about coffee that was basic but hot, about the East Ridge in 7 different seasons, about the bridge, and September, and the way the question had been asked. "Will you let this be what it is?" She walked to the center of the hall. The traditional words were said. They were said properly, because tradition mattered here, and Lena had learned them, because she had been given them in advance and she was the kind of person who did not arrive unprepared. When it was her turn to speak, she spoke clearly, in the quiet of the hall, with the same voice she used for everything. The practical one, the one that was simply hers. When it was done, the mark on her collarbone, which had been there since February of the previous year, settled into something different. Not brighter, not dramatic, just complete. Finished in the way that a sentence becomes a sentence when it has its period. He held both her hands. "Lena," he said. "Just her name, not anything else." "I know," she said. From somewhere in the middle rows, Clara made a sound that she would later describe as entirely composed. Harriet held Wren up so she could see. Wren regarded the proceedings with her characteristic serious attention, then reached both hands toward Lena, which was her opinion on the situation. The ceremony hall held everything it needed to hold. The July light came through the high windows at a summer angle that the winter hall never saw. Outside the territory was the world in its summer state, the bare trees now full, the cold ground now warm. Lena thought about the long way. She thought, I am still on it. She thought, it turned out to be longer than I expected, and to go places I did not know it went, and every step of it was the right one. She looked at the man holding her hands and the child reaching toward her, and the room full of people who had, in their different ways, been part of this. She thought, here. She thought, this is where the long way goes. She had always been good at walking toward things in the dark. She had learned, over the course of a year and a half and all its particular lessons, that what mattered was not the knowing what was at the end of the path. What mattered was the not hesitating, the willingness to walk anyway. She had walked. She was here. The council convened a formal session 3 weeks after the ceremony. Lena had expected this. Arthur had mentioned it. In the matter-of-fact way he mentioned things he considered inevitable and not worth excessive preparation. He said, there are questions that the formal council is required to ask. They are administrative questions. You will not find them difficult. He had paused, and then added, I've already answered most of them informally, but formality has its requirements. She arrived at the council chamber on a Tuesday morning in August. The chamber was a long room, with a table that went the same direction as the room, and 12 people seated around it, and high windows that were currently admitting the late summer light, in a way that was probably very pleasant when you were not the person being formally received by a governing body. She sat in the chair at the end of the table that had been placed there for her. Arthur sat at the center of the table on the long side, because he was the senior council member, and the center of the long side was where he sat. He had the expression he always had, contained, evaluating, the expression of a man who was going to form his opinion based on evidence and not on anything else. The questions were administrative, as Arthur had said. They concerned her certification, her medical training, her previous postings. They concerned the terms of her role in the territory infirmary and her plans going forward. They concerned, briefly and with a formality that was more ritual than personal, the nature of the bonding and the verification of the mark. She answered all of them in the direct, practical way that she answered things, without excess and without evasion. She was aware that she was being assessed on something beyond the content of the answers, on the manner of them, on what the manner communicated about who she was and how she intended to inhabit this territory. She intended to inhabit it as herself. She communicated this through her answers without saying it explicitly, because she understood that explicit statements of this kind were less convincing than demonstration. Near the end of the session, a council member named Edward, who was in his late 40s and who had spent the first 40 minutes of the meeting with an expression of carefully managed skepticism, asked, "The pack you came from? Ashfield. A small pack. What prepared you for this?" Lena looked at him. "The work," she said. "I'm a healer. I've been a healer for 8 years in various contexts. That's what prepared me." He held her gaze. "I meant for this specific situation." "I know what you meant," she said, "and my answer is the same." She paused. "I didn't come here to inhabit a situation. I came here because I was asked to, and because my reasons for saying yes were real, and because I intend to do good work here the way I've done good work everywhere I've been." She looked around the table, briefly, including all 12 of them in the answer. "If there are specific concerns about my ability to function in this role, I'm happy to address them. If the concern is simply that I came from a small place, I'd note that the quality of a place and its size don't always agree." Edward looked at her for a moment. Then something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, but in the direction of a reassessment. Arthur, at the center of the table, said, "She was practically intelligent. I mentioned this in February." 2 people around the table made sounds that might have been agreement. The session ended 40 minutes later with the formal conclusion of the receiving, which involved a short statement from Arthur that Lena was recognized as a member of the territory's medical staff and as a formal member of the Northern Alliance in the appropriate capacity. It was clean and correct and finished. She walked out of the council chamber into the August light, and she stood in the covered walkway for a moment and breathed. Oren appeared from somewhere to her left. "That went well," he said. "Edward," she said. "Edward has concerns about everything new," Oren said. "He had concerns about the new filing system in the administrative office. He came around in 3 months." He paused. "I give you 2. She looked at him. "Is that a bet?" "It is not a bet," he said. "Oren does not bet. But if Oren were the kind of person who bet, the over-under would be 2 months. She almost smiled. Oren's face remained completely composed. "Thank you," she said, "for what you've done since February." He looked at her with his watchful, careful regard. I've done my job, he said. Then, he's a better version of himself than he was a year and a half ago. That's the relevant thing. He walked away before she could respond to this, which was, she had come to understand, very much how Oren operated. He said exactly one significant thing and then removed himself from the vicinity. She stood in the walkway and thought about what he had said. She thought about Calum in February, the man who had come through the infirmary door with 4 guards and a fixed, focused face and the weight of 6 years of loss in his expression. She thought about the man who had written her a letter about a medication cabinet, about the man on the September bridge who had asked a careful question in a voice that had nothing hidden in it, about the man in the ceremony hall 3 weeks ago who had said just her name. She thought, he is a better version of himself. She thought, so am I. She went to the infirmary. She had 2 afternoon patients and a medication review for an elderly man named Harold, who had the particular quality of someone who did not need the medication review as much as he needed to sit in a warm room and talk to someone who would listen, which was its own kind of medicine. She listened to Harold for 40 minutes. She reviewed his medications for 10. She told him his next appointment was in 6 weeks and he said he would see her before then, because he had an ongoing question about his knee that he had forgotten to raise today. She told him to bring it next time. He said he would. She knew he would because this was the 3rd time he had forgotten the knee question, and she had noted it in his chart. She wrote up Harold's notes and 2 sets of patient notes, and she organized the next week's appointment schedule with the efficiency she brought to all administrative tasks, and then she walked home. She used the word without thinking about it now. It had been home for 7 months. It had the casual familiarity of home, through the August territory. Calum was in the garden when she came through the courtyard gate, not doing anything in particular, standing near the summer roses that grew against the south wall of the residence, which were at their fullest in late August. He was looking at them the way he sometimes looked at the November garden from the study window, with the particular quality of someone allowing themselves to simply be in the presence of a thing for a moment. She came and stood beside him. How was the council? He asked. He had not gone. That had been her preference and he had held to it. Fine, she said. Edward is going to be a project. Edward is always a project, he said. He came around on the new filing system eventually. 2 months, apparently, she said, according to Oren. He looked at her. Oren said that? He was very careful to specify that he does not bet. He looked at the roses. Then he made the sound that was in the direction of a smile, the restrained one she had come to know as his genuine version. He does not bet, he confirmed. They stood in the garden together in the August evening. The summer had been, she was coming to understand, the most generous the territory got. Long warm days and clear nights, and the roses against the south wall, and the particular generous quality of a northern summer that knew it was temporary, and made the most of it. She thought, I have been here through 1 winter and 1 spring and most of 1 summer. She thought, I know this place now. Not entirely, but I know where the knowing begins. I want to go back to Ashfield, she said. He looked at her. Not to stay, she said immediately, because she saw what he was doing. The careful management of his face, the not showing of the response. To visit, to walk the ridge, to see Clara. He breathed out. Of course, he said. When do you want to go? September, she said. I want to go in September. Take the long way over the ridge. She paused. It's different in September. Better than it sounds. I know, he said. You described it in the letters. She had. She had described September on the ridge in the 3rd letter of the 2nd September, the one that had arrived while she was still in Ashfield and thinking about the territory, thinking about whether she was going to be able to be herself in a large place. She had written about the September quality of the pines and the stream running clear over its brown stones, and the light that came from a lower angle and lasted longer than it had any right to. He had written back about the territory in September, and she had learned, from his description, that the territory had its own September version, also different from every other month, also lower lit, also the particular end of summer quality that September had everywhere. She had not seen the territory's September yet. Bring Wren, she said. He looked at her. Bring Wren to the ridge, she said. She can see where she started, where the hollow oak is. She paused. She's old enough to be carried in the carrier. Harriet will have opinions about the cold. Harriet has opinions about everything, he said. I'll manage Harriet, she said. He looked at her with the look she knew, the one that had started in February and had learned itself in letters, and had arrived at something she was still finding the right word for. September, he said. September, she confirmed. The August evening was warm, and the roses were at their fullest, and the territory was quiet around them in the way that large places could be quiet when the necessary things had been done for the day, and there was nothing urgent, demanding the available attention. She had not, before this, been in many places where the quiet felt like it had room in it. She had been in many places where quiet was simply the absence of noise, temporary, waiting to be filled. This was different. This was the quiet that had been lived in for a long time, and knew what to do with itself. She was learning to live in it. Harold came back the following Tuesday. He had remembered the knee question. She listened to him about the knee for 40 minutes, and then she assessed the knee, and she recommended a specific exercise regimen and a follow-up in 4 weeks. And he said he had a question about his shoulder that he had forgotten to raise today. She noted it in his chart. She told him to bring it next time. He said he would. She thought, 4 months maybe, for Harold. She put it in the chart. Nora's ankle was doing extremely well. Nora came in on her regular schedule and reported improvement with the particular satisfaction of someone who has had a problem managed correctly, after a long time of having it managed inconsistently. She also reported, on the 3rd visit, that she had told her neighbor about Lena, who had a back problem that had been similarly inconsistent, and that the neighbor would be calling to make an appointment. "I hope that's all right," Nora said. "It's all right," Lena said. "That's how it works." Nora looked satisfied. "You're very good," she said, in the tone of someone revising an already positive opinion upward. "Better than I expected, and I expected good." "I appreciate that," Lena said. She did. She was learning to receive this kind of thing from patients, which she had never been particularly skilled at. She tended to redirect it toward the work, toward the specifics of the treatment plan, rather than simply accepting that someone was telling her she was good. Dr. Elise had noted this, early on, with the characteristic bluntness. "Accept the compliment," she had said. "Patients need to feel their care was good. Redirecting makes them uncertain." She was working on it. She was working on many things, in the small incremental way of building a life, adjusting and learning and making the daily specific decisions that accumulated into something that looked, from the right angle, like belonging. In the northeast room, the bookshelf was full. She had added a second row on the lower shelf. The cactus had grown, which surprised her, because she had always understood cacti to be very slow. Clara said she was probably watering it correctly for the first time in her life, which was Clara's way of saying something warm. The drawer of letters, which was now a box on the shelf, sat next to a smaller box that had started to accumulate new letters. She still wrote to Clara on Tuesdays. She still received letters from the territory's various corners. Dr. Elise's formal recommendations, Arthur's brief and precise memos, Harriet's very detailed updates about Wren that were technically addressed to Calum, but were clearly written with Lena as the primary audience. She was in the letters, and the letters were in her life, and the life had the shape that she had negotiated for on a bridge in September, with a man who did not make promises he did not intend to keep. She was not small here. She was, in the slow and undramatic way of things that are actually happening, home. The September visit to Ashfield was planned for the 2nd week of the month. She wrote to Clara a month in advance, which Clara confirmed in return with the efficiency of someone who had been expecting the letter and had already made arrangements. Clara wrote that she had spoken to the new healer, Ruth, who was curious and welcoming, and had said that any visit to the Ashfield infirmary by Lena was entirely welcome, which Lena suspected was Ruth being professional about a situation that had some inherent awkwardness. The previous occupant of your post arriving with the Alpha King of the Northern Territories to visit the place she used to work. She had been thinking about the territory visit through the lens of this awkwardness, and had concluded that the awkwardness was manageable, and that the important thing was the ridge and the oak, and the particular September quality of a place that had been significant to her, and that those things were worth the management. Harriet's opinions about the cold were, as predicted, extensive. She approved of the carrier. She had in fact selected the carrier, because Harriet selected all child transport equipment as a matter of principle. She expressed views about the appropriate layering for a 1-year-old in mountain cold. She prepared a bag of supplies of an impressive completeness. She then handed Wren to Lena at the vehicle with the expression of someone who has done everything possible and is now trusting the competent person they have determined is competent. "She had a good breakfast," Harriet said. "She'll be tired by 2. The carrier helps with that. Movement." "I know," Lena said. "Thank you." "Don't let her pull her mittens off," Harriet said. "She will try." "I know," Lena said, because she did know. Because she had been watching Wren for over a year and had developed a comprehensive understanding of Wren's relationship with Mittens, which was adversarial. They drove to Ashfield. The drive took 4 hours. Ren slept for most of the first 2 hours in her seat with the absolute commitment of a child who has decided that this is nap time and the forward motion is adequate. She was awake and alert for the last 2 hours, watching the changing landscape with serious interest. The Territory Road became the Regional Road, became the roads Lena knew. She watched the landscape shift as she drove south, the trees changing quality, the hills getting lower, the particular configuration of a place assembling itself back into recognition. She had not been back since January. 8 months. There, she said, when they crossed the boundary marker into the Ashfield area, and she said it without thinking, to herself, to the familiar shape of a territory. Calum looked at the marker. Does it feel different? He asked, coming back. It feels smaller than it did when I left, she said. Then, carefully, not in a bad way, in the way that distance changes proportion, she looked at the road. It's right-sized for what it is. It always was. I just couldn't see the scale properly from inside it. He was quiet, considering this. They stopped at the guest house first, the same guest house, adequate with its window in the wrong direction, which he noted with a look she recognized. Oren handled the arrivals. Lena carried Ren in the carrier, already secured and comfortable, through the cold September afternoon air. Clara was at the infirmary. She was there because she was always there, at this hour, on a Wednesday, but also because she had known Lena was coming, and had found reasons to be present in the exact location where Lena would arrive. Lena recognized this, and appreciated it. Clara hugged her. Lena led her, properly, with both arms, for the required amount of time. Then Clara looked at Ren. Ren looked at Clara. Ren considered Clara for a long moment, the serious, evaluating look she had been using on the world since she was 1 hour old. Then she reached both hands toward her. Clara made the sound she was always going to make. She put her hands over her face for approximately 2 seconds, then composed herself with formidable speed. "Hello," she said, very warmly, to Ren. "I've been hearing about you for a year." Ren appeared to find this acceptable. Ruth was in the staff room. She was exactly as Lena had imagined her, a few years younger, very capable, clearly comfortable in the space. She greeted Lena with the directness of someone who is not going to be strange about a situation that could be strange. She greeted Calum with appropriate formality, and recovered from the formality quickly. "Clara says you reorganized the supply room," Ruth said to Lena. "Yes," Lena said. "It was good. I've kept it the same. I moved the bandages." "That makes more sense," Lena said. Because it did. She had put the bandages in a slightly awkward position because of the cabinet door clearance, and she had meant to move them and never had. Ruth nodded, satisfied. "Also, the medication cabinet is excellent." "I know," Lena said. Then, "Dr. Elise's system in the territory is worth looking at. Her labeling approach is better than mine was." Ruth looked interested. "Send me the specifics?" "I will," Lena said. She walked through the infirmary, not performing the walk, just walking through it, relearning the spaces she had inhabited for 3 years, the supply room, the staff room, the empty assessment room at the end of the hallway, the room that had been the baby's room and was now configured for general use. She stood in the doorway of that room for a moment. She thought about a warming table and a monitoring line, about the particular late-night quiet of a place that is very focused on keeping something alive, about the first morning, when she had come in before her shift and the baby had been awake and looking at the light with her characteristic gravity. Ren moved in the carrier. She was awake and interested in the room. Lena looked at her. "This is where you started," she said, very quietly. "This is the first room." Ren did not understand this. She was examining the ceiling lights, which were different from the ones at home, and therefore interesting. "You did very well," Lena said. "In the first room, in the first night." She stepped back from the doorway. She went down the corridor to find Clara and Calum, and to continue the afternoon. They went to the ridge at 4 o'clock. It was the right hour. The September light at that low, generous angle, the pines gold at their tips, the sky the clear, cold blue of the Territory and Ashfield both when September was doing itself properly. She carried Ren in the carrier, well layered against the cold. Ren's mittens were intact. She was examining the trees with focused attention. Calum walked beside her. He was in proper boots this time. "Better," she said. He looked at his feet. "I learned." They walked the ridge in the September light. She showed him the places she had described in the letters, the fence the eastern wind had pushed sideways, the section where the ground dipped and you had to catch yourself, the wooden bridge over the stream that was running clear over its brown stones in the way of September streams everywhere. He stood on the bridge and looked at the water. It was the right stream, he said. Yes, she said. It was. She had described this stream in the letters. The April stream, the September stream. He had been on this bridge before. He had stood here with her in September of the previous year, and heard about Iris and the rivers that didn't pretend to be calm. He was looking at it now the way he sometimes looked at the May garden, with the quality of someone allowing themselves to be in the presence of a thing that has meaning, not managing it or organizing it, just being in it. Wren grabbed the strap of the carrier with one mitten and examined it. They walked off the bridge into the oak. The split oak was the same. The hollow at the base was the same. The cold was the same quality. Clear and direct, the kind that doesn't surprise you. She stopped in front of it. She took Wren out of the carrier. Wren blinked in the sudden air. She looked at the oak. She looked at the hollow. She reached toward it with characteristic curiosity. This is where you were, Lena said. In February. A long time ago for you. Not so long for us. She held her so she could see the hollow. You were very small and very cold, and someone left you here, and I was walking home, and I heard you. Wren looked at the hollow. Then she looked at Lena. Then she made the sound she made when she was in the territory of a feeling she did not have words for yet. I know, Lena said. Me too. Calum put his hand on the bark of the oak, lightly, briefly. They stood there for a moment, all three of them, in the cold, by the split oak on the east ridge in September, in the particular quality of a moment that is so complete, it doesn't need anything added to it. Then Wren decided she wanted back in the carrier, because it was warm and she was done with the cold, and expressed this decision clearly, and Lena put her back, and they walked the rest of the ridge in the September light back toward the town. Clara met them at the bottom of the ridge road with thermoses of tea, because Clara was fundamentally a person who met arriving cold people with hot drinks. They all stood in the early September dark and drank tea, and Clara told Lena about the drawer situation that she had finally resolved, and Lena told Clara about Harold's knee and shoulder, and how the shoulder had turned out to be more interesting than the knee, when Harold finally remembered to raise it. Wren fell asleep in the carrier against Lena's chest, exhausted by September and trees and mittens and the effort of examining everything. They went back to the guest house. Later, when Wren was settled and the adults were in the guest house's small sitting room with the window that faced the wrong direction, Clara said goodnight and went to her room with the tact of someone who understands when to be elsewhere. Oren was already somewhere else. Lena and Calum sat in the sitting room. Thank you for bringing me here, he said. I wanted you to see it, she said. The real version, not the convoy version. Is there a difference? Convoys see the front of things, she said. The long way sees the back. He looked at her. Which is better? She thought about it. They're both necessary, she said, but the back is where I lived. He was quiet for a moment. Then, will we come back? Every September? She had not planned this. She had not had a plan beyond the visit, beyond the specific desire to stand by the oak and bring Wren to see where she started. But the question arrived and she heard herself, without much hesitation, reaching for the answer. Yes, she said. Every September. He nodded. They sat in the sitting room with the wrong direction window, and outside was Ashfield, quiet and small, and exactly right-sized for what it was. In the corridor, Wren was sleeping the deep sleep of a child who has had a full day and was home, because Wren was home wherever Lena was and wherever Calum was, and that was the whole of her geography. Lena thought about the drawer, about the letters, about the 4 minutes in the assessment room both times, and Clara timing them and never saying anything about it until she did. She thought, I walked a long way to get here. She thought, every step was necessary. She was good at the long way. She had been good at it before she knew it was taking her anywhere, and she was better at it now. She drank her tea. Outside, Ashfield was exactly what it had always been, and she was not exactly what she had always been, because a year and a half had changed things in the way that only a year and a half spent walking toward something can change things. But she was still herself. That was the thing she had needed to know, and she knew it now, and it sat in her chest with the quiet satisfaction of a fact that has been verified. She was still herself. She was just home. The winter that followed was different from the one that had come before it. She understood the territory's winter now. She had learned it through the previous year, the way the cold settled here in November and did not intend to leave until March, the way the light contracted to its briefest self in December and sat low and pale through the high windows of the residence and the consultation rooms of the infirmary. She had learned the specific cold of the northern morning and how to dress for it, the kind of boots that worked on the territory paths, the fact that the courtyard tree at the infirmary was bare and beautiful in December, in the way that bare trees are beautiful when you have learned to look at them correctly. She was warm in it now, not just because she had the right coat. Wren walked. This happened in November, at 15 months, which Harriet confirmed was within the expected range, and which Calum reported in a letter to Lena's infirmary office with the controlled excitement of someone who is not performing controlled excitement, who is genuinely trying to be moderate about a thing that is not actually moderate. She came home from the infirmary at 5 o'clock to find Wren in the middle of the nursery mat, standing independently with the focused, slightly precarious confidence of someone who has just figured out that this is a viable approach and is not quite at peace with how much concentration it requires. She was looking at the space between herself and the shelving unit on the far side of the room, calculating. "Wren," Lena said from the doorway. Wren looked at her. She crossed the nursery in 12 steps. 12 deliberate, effortful, magnificent steps. She arrived at Lena's legs and grabbed them with both hands and looked up with the expression of someone who has just done something large and knows it. "Yes," Lena said. "You did." Harriet was in the doorway behind Lena with an expression that was, for Harriet, approximately the same as laughing. She lifted Wren. She held her the way she had learned to hold her, the carry that worked for Wren specifically, that had established itself over 15 months of mornings in the nursery, and walks on the territory grounds, and evenings in the sitting room when Wren was tired and wanted the particular combination of warmth and stillness and voice. 12 steps, she said. "I counted," Harriet confirmed. She wrote to Clara that evening. She wrote she walked today. 12 steps. I was there. She sat with the letter for a moment after writing this. She was aware that it was a small sentence containing something larger, and she let the larger thing be there without trying to explain it further. She sent the letter. December was the territory's most formal month, and she navigated it with the particular competence she had developed over the previous year. The competence of someone who has learned a new context thoroughly enough to be effective in it without being natural in it. She was not natural in formal settings. She suspected she was never going to be natural in them. What she was capable, and she had found that capable was sufficient. The December gatherings were different from Ashfield's Central Hall events. They were larger and more structured, and attended by people who had been attending them for decades and knew every part of the structure. She went to the ones she was required to go to. She wore what the occasion required. She stood next to Calum, who moved through these events with the ease of someone who had been doing them since childhood, and she held herself in the way she had always held herself, present, attentive, not performing anything she didn't feel. Arthur found her at the largest of the December events, standing near the back of the room with a glass of something warm that she had been nursing for 40 minutes because the warmth was its own purpose. "You're doing well," he said, in the tone of someone reporting a finding. "I'm here," she said. "That's the same thing, in December," he said. He stood beside her and looked at the room. "These events are useful. They remind the Alliance that the territory has continuity, that things are stable. Is that what they remind you of?" she asked. He considered. "They remind me that I have been doing this for 18 years, and that it becomes, with practice, simply something you do." He paused. "Like cold weather, or difficult patients." She looked at him. "Are the patients difficult?" "These events are full of people who are the patients," he said. "They have the same requirements. Careful attention, accurate information. Don't tell them what they want to hear if what they want to hear is wrong." She thought about this. "You're actually a practical person," she said. "I've always been a practical person," Arthur said with mild offense. "I told him so when he first mentioned you. I said, find someone practical." He looked at me as though I had just said something profound. He took a small sip of his drink. "He had already found you. He just needed to know that I knew that." She looked at Arthur. She had been building a picture of Arthur since January, assembling it from every interaction. The picture had not been immediately flattering. He was formal, he was measured. He had asked hard questions in the council chamber. But over months, the picture had developed in the way pictures do when you spend enough time with the subject. He was, she understood now, the person who had been here for 18 years because he believed in what the territory could be when it was functioning correctly. He was here the same way she was here, not because of ceremony or status, but because the work mattered, and he was good at it. "Thank you," she said, "for answering their questions in February before they had finished forming them." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, the measured quality softening briefly into something warmer. "He would have managed without me," Arthur said. "He's managed most things without me." "Probably," she agreed, "but it mattered." He nodded once, in the precise way that Arthur used to acknowledge things that he intended to take seriously. They stood together for a while longer, not talking particularly, watching the December event move around them. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had arrived at a mutual understanding and did not need to perform beyond it. The year turned. Ren turned 2 in April, and she had opinions about it, about the cake, which she had investigated carefully before committing, about the candles, which she was very interested in and which Harriet supervised with close attention, about the people gathered in the nursery, whom she greeted with the social confidence of someone who has spent 2 years being adored by a careful selection of adults and has concluded that this is simply how the world works. At 2, Ren had words. Not many, and not reliably, but the beginning architecture of language was there, sounds that had consistent meaning, expressions that combined physical and vocal communication into something approaching sentences, and one word that had arrived fully formed several weeks before the birthday, and that she used with the precision of someone who understood exactly what it meant. She said it first on a Tuesday morning, in the nursery, while Lena was sitting on the mat and Ren was doing the negotiation between wanting to be held and wanting to walk that occupied a significant portion of her toddler existence. She arrived at Lena's lap and settled there with the authority of someone taking a designated seat. She looked up at her. She said, "Mama." Lena did not move. She heard the word. She understood the word. She had been told by Harriet, who had 30 years of experience with children in this age range, that the first consistent use of parental terms would arrive around this age and would not necessarily be preceded by any warning or ceremony. There was no ceremony. Just Ren on her lap looking up at her with the complete certainty that the word fit, that it was the right word for this exact person, that this was simply what was true. Lena put her arms around her. She held her very carefully, the way you hold something that you understand the full weight of. "Yes," she said. Her voice was level. She was very good at her voice being level. "Yes, that's right." She sat there for a long time. She wrote to Clara that evening. She wrote the word, and then she wrote, "I was not prepared for how that word would land. I don't think preparation was possible." Clara's response came in 4 days and contained 3 lines. "Of course you weren't. There is no preparation for that word from that person. I told you in September of last year that you had already decided. Now you know what you decided." She read this several times. She did know what she had decided. She had known it since the hollow oak, in the specific and wordless way that certain decisions are made before the decision is named. She had walked toward a sound in the dark, and the sound had been Ren, and Ren had spent 2 years arriving at this word for her, and the word was the whole thing in its simplest possible form. Caleb came in from the garden in the evening to find her still at the desk. "Harriet told me," he said. She looked up. His expression was the one she knew best by now, the careful one, the one that was feeling something it did not want to simplify by naming too quickly. "She said it clearly?" he asked. "Not ambiguously?" "She was looking directly at me," Lena said. "She had just sat on my lap and she looked up and she said it." She paused. No ambiguity. He sat down across from her. He was quiet for a moment. "Iris would have." He started. He stopped. He did this occasionally, started a sentence about Iris and then stopped it, not because the sentence was too difficult, but because he was deciding whether it was the right sentence. Iris would have said something that was both very funny and very correct. About this moment. I don't know exactly what, but she would have found the thing. "What do you think it would have been?" Lena asked. He thought about it. He held the consideration with the seriousness he gave to things that mattered. "Something about the long way," he said finally. "I think. She always liked that." Lena thought about this. "Me too," she said. He reached across the table and held her hand. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just held it, in the quiet of the evening, with the certainty of 2 people who have arrived at where they are going. "The long way," he said. "The long way," she agreed. Outside the northeast window, the territory was in April again, the slow, careful spring, the bare trees beginning the patient return of their leaves, the light shifting toward the longer days that were coming but had not arrived. She had been here through 1 winter and 1 spring and 1 summer and 1 autumn, and now 1 more winter and 1 more spring. She knew this place. She had learned its cold and its light and its particular quality of each season. She knew the courtyard tree and Harold's shoulder and Nora's ankle and Arthur's 2-month schedule for coming around on new things. She knew Harriet's opinions and Oren's operational calm and the nursery's low ceiling and the morning light through the northeast window. She knew the word Ren had used. She was in the slow and certain way of things that are real, here, not visiting, not managing the distance between herself and a large place, not building an exit. Here. It had taken, she thought, the long way to get here. The specific kind of long way that goes through hollow oaks in February, and letters about medication cabinets and bridges in September, and council chambers in August and December events that she navigated with the competence of someone who had learned the territory. Every step of it had been necessary. She would not, if she could have, taken the short path. Edward came around in 8 weeks, not 2. Oren noted this without comment, which was, for Oren, a form of commentary. What changed Edward was not a single event. It was the accumulation of interactions in the infirmary corridor, because Edward had a long-term back problem that Dr. Elise had been managing carefully for years, and Lena had taken over the ongoing care as part of her general patient list, and over 8 weeks of appointments Edward had formed a view about her work that was based entirely on the work and had nothing to do with anything else. He said on the 8th week at the end of an appointment, "You're thorough." "I try to be," Lena said. "More thorough than most," he said. He was putting on his jacket with the particular care of someone whose back required careful movement. "The previous treatment plan was adequate. Yours is better." "It's a different approach," Lena said. "Not necessarily better. Different evidence base." "It's better," Edward said. He buttoned his jacket. "I was skeptical. I imagine you knew." "You asked a question in the council chamber," she said. "It was a fair question. It was the question I was supposed to ask," Edward said. "The council asks questions. That's its function." He looked at her. "The answer you gave was also fair." He left. She updated his file with the thoroughness that Edward had apparently noticed, and that she applied to all patient files, without distinction, because her standards did not adjust based on who was being treated or what they thought of her. Dr. Elise found her in the corridor afterward. "Edward told me the treatment plan was better than the previous one," she said. "I know," Lena said. "He told me too." Dr. Elise looked at her. "He doesn't usually acknowledge that things are better than the previous approach. He has a complicated relationship with change." "He just needs the right evidence," Lena said. "He's a practical person. He responds to data." Dr. Elise considered this. Then, "You're probably the only person on the territory who has described Edward as practical." "He is, though," Lena said. "The skepticism in the council chamber, the 2 months of evaluation before committing to a new treatment plan, that's practical. He just requires time." Dr. Elise was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you know to look at people that way?" 3 years in a small pack infirmary, Lena said. "You learn to understand patients as they are, not as the difficulty they present." Dr. Elise nodded, slowly, the nod of someone adding a data point to a long-running assessment. "I'm glad you're here," she said. She said it with the bluntness she applied to all statements of significance, directly, without wrapping it in anything. "I was skeptical in January. I'm not skeptical now." 2 months? Lena asked. The corner of Dr. Elise's mouth moved. 8, actually. "Longer than Edward," Lena said. "I have higher standards," Dr. Elise said, and walked away. The autumn of the 2nd year was the fullest she had known in a long time. Her patient list was large now, not unmanageably large, but the kind of large that meant she was needed, that meant people had come by way of other people who had been helped, that meant the work had the quality she had always wanted it to have, not just competent, but trusted. She had coffee on Thursday mornings with Dr. Elise, who was not a person who had coffee with people as a social practice but who had, at some point in the spring, begun appearing in the staff room on Thursday mornings and making observations about the week's cases with the manner of someone who was not having coffee with someone, merely occupying the same space and making observations. Lena accepted this arrangement for what it was and did not attempt to formalize it. She had dinner on alternate Fridays with Arthur, who was a person of set habits, and had been having dinner on alternate Fridays with a small rotating group of people for 15 years. He had added her to the rotation in March. She had not been asked if she wanted to be added. She had simply received an invitation to a Friday dinner at Arthur's house, which was a very well-organized house full of books and a small collection of maps, and she had attended, and he had treated her as a person who belonged there, which she had come to understand was how Arthur communicated welcome. Wren, at 2.5, was a person with a great deal to say and the vocabulary to begin saying it, supplemented by physical communication of extraordinary expressiveness. She had views about meals, about the order in which activities occurred, about which books were appropriate before sleep and which were too exciting. She had views about the people in her life and communicated those views with the directness of someone who has not yet learned to soften them. Her views about Lena were unambiguous. "Mama come," she said. Every morning she was dropped at the nursery when Lena was going to the infirmary. "Mama come back." "Mama comes back," Lena said, every morning. "Same time." "Same time," Wren repeated, with the gravity of someone confirming a treaty. Same time, Lena confirmed. She came back. Every day, at the same time. The consistency was not something she thought about as a strategy. It was simply what the situation required, and she was a person who did what the situation required. But she understood, from Harriet's quiet observations and from her own developing knowledge of how Ren organized the world, that the consistency was doing something important. That same time was not just reassurance, it was architecture. She was building the architecture of this child's trust, one, same time, at a time. The way she had built everything else in her life, in increments, in the small specific units that accumulated into something larger. On a Wednesday evening in late October, she was in the study with Calum, going through the logistics of a territorial matter that was adjacent to the infirmary's service coverage. It was not a romantic evening. It was a practical conversation about resources and service boundaries, which they had with some regularity because their work intersected in ways that required coordination. They were, both of them, practical people in practical roles in the same territory, and part of the life they had built was this: the working through of real things in the evenings, the specific adult business of sharing a life that had actual content and was not only personal. She was making a note about the Eastern service boundary when he said, without particular preamble, "I want to tell you something." She put the pen down. She looked at him. He had the expression he got when he was about to say something he had been organizing for some time. "When Iris died," he said carefully, "I made a decision. I decided that everything I had that was worth having was in the past, that the future was a place you maintained, not a place you went toward." He paused. "I was very certain about this. For 6 years I was certain." She waited. "I want you to know that I understand what it cost," he said. "What it cost you to say yes, to the letters, to the bridge, to the room with the morning light, to everything that has happened since February of last year." He looked at her directly. "You brought all of yourself here. That's not a small thing to ask of a person." She looked at him. "You didn't ask," she said. "I know," he said. "That's the thing I wanted to say. You came because you decided to come. All of it, every part of it, was your decision. And I want to say thank you. Not formally, not as the Alpha King thanking a member of his territory, as the person who is sitting here with you now, who is in this room because you decided to let him be." She was quiet for a moment. "You wrote to me about a medication cabinet," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what broke me," she said. "That was the letter." She looked at the window. "I had managed everything else. The mark, the bridge, the letters about the East Ridge and the territory and Ren. I had organized all of it into things I was thinking about. Then you wrote about the medication cabinet, and it was so small and so real, and I thought, he actually wants to know. He's not building anything or managing anything. He just wants to know about the medication cabinet." He was looking at her. "That's who I am," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what broke me." They sat in the study with the autumn evening outside, quiet the way the territory was quiet. The particular fullness of a life that had been built room by room and letter by letter and decision by decision. She thought about the hollow oak, as she did sometimes, not in a way that was haunting, but in the way that origins have a gravity, that the place you started from has a relationship with the place you are. She had been on the East Ridge in February with -14 degrees and a sound between a breath and a whimper, and she had walked toward it, and the walking had not stopped since. She was still walking. The long way was still the long way, and it was still hers, and it went places she had not known it went, and every place it had taken her had been necessary. She was practical. She had always been practical. She had built her life on the small, real, specific things, on wound care documentation and Tuesday letters and supply room inventories, on the particular quality of September light, on the same time, every day, without exception, on a sound in the dark that she had not convinced herself she'd imagined. She picked up her pen. She wrote the note about the Eastern service boundary. They continued the logistics conversation, because the logistics required it, and because that was also the life, the working through of real things. Same time, every day. That was the architecture. She was the person who built it. 3 years after the hollow oak. The East Ridge in February was exactly as she had left it, the particular cold, the particular dark, the particular quality of the sound of the pines in -14. She had been back 7 times in 3 years, for September and sometimes other seasons, and every time the ridge received her with the same indifference that places have for the people who pass through them, which she found comforting rather than cold. The ridge was not keeping track. It was simply itself. She was walking it alone. Calum was in Ashfield, but at the guest house. He had a meeting in the morning with the regional representatives, one of the quarterly alliance coordination sessions that moved through the member territories in rotation. Ashfield was hosting this quarter. The meeting was the reason for the visit, and the visit was the reason she was here, and the ridge was the reason she had come out at 11 in the evening despite the cold, despite the reasonable argument she had had with herself before putting on the coat and the boots and going out the back of the guest house. She had always taken the long way. She had been in the territory for 3 years. She knew its paths now the way she had known Ashfield's, the territory paths, the routes between the buildings on the grounds, the road from the infirmary to the residence, the garden in its winter and spring and summer and autumn versions. She knew where the ice formed overnight on the courtyard path and where it didn't. She knew the north wing's particular cold, which was different from the south wing's. She knew the study windows light at 7 in the morning, and at 3 in the afternoon, and at 11 in the evening. She had been in the territory for 3 years. The East Ridge was a visit. But standing on it in February at 11 at night, she felt something familiar settle. The particular quality of a place that was the first version of home, the one that taught you what home meant so you could recognize it in other forms. She was not nostalgic about it. She was grateful for it, which was different. Nostalgia looks back. Gratitude looks at what a thing gave you and recognizes it clearly. The ridge had given her the long way, and the long way had given her everything. She walked to the oak. She had walked to it every September visit with Wren in the carrier, or on her hip, or, most recently, on her own 2 feet beside them, since Wren was walking. She had walked to it alone on the other visits, in other seasons, at various hours. She was not done coming to it. She stood in front of it. The hollow was the same. The cold that came out of it was the same cold. She crouched down and looked in. Empty. Good. She stood up. She thought about 3 years ago. She was very specific about it. Not the general fact of it, but the specific quality. The weight of the cold. The sound she had almost not heard. The decision to turn, to crouch, to look. The navy jacket and what was inside it. She thought about Wren, 3 years later, who was 2.5 and had opinions about everything, and could form sentences with the determination of someone who understands that words are leverage, who had a word for her, who said the word every morning and every evening, and at varying points in between, the way you use a word you have claimed for yourself. She thought about what it had cost, the way he had asked her to think about it in the study on that October evening. She thought, it cost the manageable life, the small, reasonable, sufficient life I had built in this pack, with the long way home and the supply room, and the work I was good at. She thought, that was not nothing, that was a real thing. And she thought, I gave it, and I got this. The cold pressed against her without patience. She was in her good coat and her good boots, and the cold understood these were adequate. It did not retreat, it just waited. She turned around and walked back. She did not stop at the stream. It was too cold for standing on bridges, but she walked past it, and heard it moving under the ice, working its patient way through the winter the way water always did. It would be running clear in April. She would probably be here in September. She and Calum and Wren on the wooden bridge, the 3 of them. The September light. Every September, she had said. She was on the 3rd one. She walked back to Ashfield through the dark and the cold, the way she had walked it hundreds of times in the 3 years when this was her route home. Her feet knew the places where the ground dipped. Her body leaned into the familiar cant of the path. The storage buildings passed on her left, the old fence on her right, the tree line ahead and then behind. When she came down to the residential streets, she could see the lights of the laundromat, which was open until midnight. The hardware store next to it was dark, as it had been for 4 years since it stopped being owned by anyone. Her old building was the same building. She knew that intellectually. She had looked at it several times, had been in the infirmary that shared the same street. But she regarded it now the way you regard a place you knew well and have moved on from, with affection and the clear-eyed understanding that it is not yours anymore. She had a room elsewhere with morning light. She walked to the guest house. He was awake. She had not expected this. It was nearly midnight. His meeting was at 8 in the morning. He was a man who applied the same discipline to sleep that he applied to everything else. But the light was on in the sitting room, and when she came in from the cold, he was there with a book in the wrong direction window. You went to the ridge, he said. I needed to walk, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Did you go to the oak? Yes. All right, he said. He set the book down. How was it? She thought about how to answer this. She took off her coat and her boots and she sat down in the chair across from him. The same, she said. The cold is the same. The hollow is the same. And And I stood there and I thought about 3 years ago. She paused. I do that every time. I think it's important to do. He looked at her with the look she knew. The careful, full one. Why? He asked. Because I want to keep the weight of it, she said. Not in a way that's heavy, in a way that's real. She was in that hollow, and the cold was that cold. And I heard her, and I went toward her. That's the whole story. I want to keep the size of it. He was quiet. We should tell her, he said, when she's old enough to understand. Not the managed version, the real version. We will, Lena said. We'll take her to the ridge, and we'll stand in front of the oak and we'll tell her the real version. She looked at the wrong direction window. She deserves to know the whole story of herself. Yes, he said. She does. The guest house sat room was quiet. Outside was Ashfield in the February cold. Inside was the warm, sufficient space of two people who had been writing to each other for 3 years and living with each other for 2.5, and who had learned the specific vocabulary of each other's silences. She told him what she had thought about on the ridge, about the cost and what it had been and what she had gotten. He listened. He had always been good at listening, the active kind, the kind that receives without immediately responding, that gives what is said the room it needs. When she was done, he said, "Do you regret it?" "No," she said, without hesitation. The same quality as not hesitating on the ridge 3 years ago. Not for a single day. Even the hard days? There had been hard days. There had been hard days. She was honest about them. The days when the council room felt like a test she was still taking. When the formal events were heavy. When she missed Clara's specific kind of company. When the territory's scale did not feel like context but like pressure. She had not hidden the hard days from him. They had developed, over 2.5 years, the specific kind of honesty that comes with shared life, not brutal, not performed, but consistent. They told each other the real things. She thought this was the most important thing they had built. Even the hard days, she said. The hard days are part of it. You can't want the life and not want the hard days. He looked at her. Who told you that? No one, she said. I figured it out when I was still in Ashfield, lying in my bed above the laundromat, thinking about the manageable life. I thought, the manageable life is the one where you don't have hard days about real things. You have small, difficult days about small, difficult things. And I realized I had been living that life for 3 years and it was not what I wanted. What did you want? He asked. She looked at him. She had not been asked this so directly before. She had been asked about requirements and conditions and timelines. She had not been asked what she wanted. This, she said. I wanted something large enough to have hard days about. I just didn't know the shape of it. He sat with this for a moment. I'm glad, he said. I'm glad you wanted the hard days. Someone had to, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. She stood up. She was tired from the ridge and the cold and the weight of thinking she had done on the walk. Come to bed, she said. You have a meeting at 8. I know, he said. He stood up. He turned off the light. They went down the hall of the adequate guest house with its window in the wrong direction, and she was not in her northeast room with the morning light, but she was here, and here was sufficient, because here was where he was, and where they would go back from in the morning, to the territory, to the life they had built there. In the morning, the meeting was at 8. He went. She went to the infirmary. Ruth had a question about a patient case, a complicated one, with elements that crossed Ruth's specialty into wound care. They went through it together in the consultation room for 20 minutes. Ruth was good. She had gotten better every year, had the specific quality of a healer who was not satisfied with adequate and kept pushing the adequate towards something finer. Lena had, without intending to, become something like a mentor in the way that happens when two competent people work in adjacent spaces and find each other useful. How do you think about this? Ruth asked, about the case's central problem. Lena thought about it. Start with what the patient is trying to tell you, she said. Not just the symptom, the behavior around the symptom. Where they put their attention when they're describing it, that's usually where the real thing is. Ruth wrote this down. That's not in any of the training texts, she said. No, Lena agreed. I learned it from patients. She finished the morning at the infirmary, and she went to Clara's, because Clara was still in Ashfield, still at the front desk, still making tea for everyone involuntarily, still watching the world, with the comprehensive attention of someone who had decided that the world was worth attending to. She made Lena tea and sat across from her in her kitchen and said, How are you? Good, Lena said. Really good. Clara looked at her with the comprehensive look. You look it, she said. You look like someone who has stopped waiting for something to go wrong. Lena considered this. Is that what I looked like before? A little, Clara said. Not obviously. But I knew you. She wrapped her hands around her mug. I know you. I know, Lena said. I know you. No. They drank their tea. Clara told her about the new intake system Ruth had proposed, which was good, but was going to require adjustment. She told her about Eddie, whose wound had long healed, and who had since had a second inadvisable farm equipment incident, which suggested a pattern. She told her about the East Ridge, which apparently one of the newer pack members had taken to using as a morning run route, which was ambitious but good, and which made Lena feel a proprietary affection that was entirely irrational, and that she accepted without judgment. You're happy, Clara said, at some point in the middle of the afternoon. Not a question, an observation. Yes, Lena said. Is it what you expected? Lena thought about it. No, she said. It's bigger and harder, and mine. She paused. All three of those things together. That's the right combination, Clara said. Yes, Lena agreed. I think it is. She walked back to the guest house in the February afternoon. She did not take the long way. It was too cold, and she had walked it last night, and she would walk it in September. But she went by the infirmary, past the front window, past the old building with the laundromat and the vacant hardware store. She stopped in front of the building for a moment. She looked at the window on the third floor where her apartment had been. She thought about the drawer of letters, about the long nights above the laundromat, about the cold that was always waiting when she came out the back of the infirmary. She thought, I was here. This was real. This is where I became the person who could do what came next. She moved on. Caleb was back from his meeting when she got to the guest house. He was in the sitting room with Oren going through the follow-up items, which were, apparently, significant. She got her own tea and sat in the chair and read her book until they were done. When Oren left, he sat back and looked at the wrong direction window. Good meeting? She asked. Productive, he said. The regional representatives are getting better at the format. It used to take 3 hours to accomplish what we did today, in 90 minutes. Progress, she said. Incrementally, he said. He looked at her. You went to the infirmary. And Clara's, she said, and past the old building. He was quiet for a moment. And it's all exactly where I left it, she said, in the best possible way. He smiled. Not the restrained version, not the careful one she had learned to read the approach of. The real one, the one that happened when he was not managing anything, and was simply in the moment he was in. It was still rare. She had not stopped appreciating it. We leave tomorrow morning, he said. I know, she said. Harriet has opinions about Wren's schedule. Harriet always has opinions about Wren's schedule. She's always right, Lena said. He stood up. He held out his hand. She took it. They stood in the sitting room of the adequate guest house, warm inside while the February cold pressed against the wrong direction window. She thought about the northeast room, about the morning light, about Wren saying same time and meaning it as a statement about the reliability of the world, about the territory in February, which was her territory's February now, the cold she had learned as her own. She thought about tomorrow morning, and the drive north and arriving at the place that was home. She thought, I heard a sound in the dark and I walked toward it and it brought me here. She thought, the long way always knows where it is going. She had been good at the long way before she understood it. She was better at it now. She would be better still by the time she finished walking it, which she intended to be a very long time from now. She held his hand in the wrong direction window room in the Ashfield guest house, and the cold was outside, and the warmth was inside, and in the territory there was a room with morning light, and a bookshelf full of books and a child who had claimed the most important word. All of it was real. All of it was hers. She had walked the long way home. She was there.